extend congratulations to the chair as well. We have quiet, please. Our proceedings are underway. First and foremost, please silence your cell phones. Next, I remind you of our seating procedures under which only town meeting members may sit forward of the checkers except for the front row center, which is reserved for town staff and non-town meeting members' speakers. Handicapped members may sit anywhere in the front row. I remind all speakers to announce your name and precinct as your first order of business, and that would be the time, if applicable, to announce any conflict and status disclosures. Your time limits are 5 minutes, except as announced by me and pre-approved by me. And finally, as always, please address questions from the floor to the moderator and not to anyone else in the auditorium. I'd like to announce that the annual meeting of the Town Meeting Members Association will be held on June 19 at 6:30 in room 103 at Town Hall. We will take the articles in substantially the order in which they appear in the warrant. I have been asked to advance the B2 articles, numbers 15 through 19, to the first item of business at our third session. More about when that will occur momentarily. So is there a motion to advance Articles 15 and 19, or to delay, as it turns out, until the first item of business at the third session of town meeting? Do I hear a second? Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. We have a scheduling conundrum for the balance of town meeting, in that our additional sessions are currently scheduled for Thursday and Monday. The likelihood is, however, that we will need a fourth session, which will be the second time in my 22-year tenure that this has occurred, but it looks likely that it will occur this town meeting owing to the number of controversial articles on the warrant. Unfortunately, the logical dates to which to adjourn to a fourth session are next Tuesday and Wednesday, which are the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, and would essentially disenfranchise the observant members of our town meeting. And on Thursday, the 5th, your moderator is leaving for 10 days in Russia, from which I understand it to be difficult to moderate a town meeting in Brookline. So we have a couple of suggestions for the fourth session. The first that I'd like to explore with you, and you can think about this during this session of town meeting, and we'll deal with it when we vote to adjourn at the close of business tonight. The first suggestion is that we hold a session tomorrow night, Wednesday, and in which case the third session would be Thursday and the fourth Monday, June 2nd. That would eliminate the issue of a fourth night at the expense of keeping you here for 3 straight nights this week, which those of you who have been around for a while have experienced. Since we didn't start this Tuesday, Thursday annual town meeting schedule until just a few years ago. Before that, there were always consecutive Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday sessions. So that one of the disadvantages to holding a meeting tomorrow night is that in the cafeteria downstairs, the Democratic Town Committee will be holding a candidates night for candidates up to and including the Lieutenant Governor for statewide office. So if you elect to adjourn to tomorrow night, you will not have access to the cafeteria, and there may be some noise problems since they will be speaking into microphones down in the cafeteria. The second alternative is, of course, if you don't want to meet tomorrow night, then the second session will be Thursday, excuse me. The third session Monday, and you can do one of three things. You can either adjourn on Monday to either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. You can adjourn to a date after I return from Russia, and my return is on the 15th, so the 16th or 17th would be an alternative. Or there's nothing to prevent your adjourning to a date when I am not available to moderate town meeting. This would be unfair to some of you, and certainly to the person who would be being asked to step in at such short notice to moderate town meeting in my absence. So those are your alternatives. Please consider them, and when it comes time to move to adjourn to our second session and select the date for that adjourned session, that I will first entertain a motion to adjourn to tomorrow night, Wednesday, and if that fails, we'll take a motion to adjourn to Thursday. The adjournment motions are debatable, so I will accept comments on and questions on at the time of the adjournment vote. Okay, that brings us to our annual, or the electronic vote dry run that we have before each town meeting. You all have your handheld devices, which have been handed out at the checkers tables. Please keep in mind that only the buttons numbered 1, 2, and 3 are operative. 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 for an abstention. During this dry run vote, I would ask you to pay very close attention to where your name appears on the screen, which will be scrolling through the lists of town meeting members. Your name will appear in the same exact position each time we take an electronic vote, so that once you located it, it will be should be simpler as we run through town meeting to locate it as for the real votes. The resolution voyage as a selectman.
The podium looks the same as are agreements between the town and a bank in which the town agrees to keep a minimum balance in a non-interest-bearing account. In return, the bank agrees to provide the town with certain banking services. This article is included in the warrant annually to provide the town's treasurer with the flexibility to enter into these agreements if he determines it is in the best interest of Brookline. The treasurer cannot enter into a compensating balance agreement without the express consent of town meeting, and this body has routinely provided the consent since the mid-1980s. Historically, the treasurer has not utilized his ability to enter into compensating balance agreements, but in this era of high bank fees and low interest rates, compensating balance agreements have become an important tool of fiscal prudence. The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends favorable action on Article 3.
Mr. Brown?
Cliff Brown, Precinct 14, for the Advisory Committee. Article 3 seeks town meeting's approval to authorize the town treasurer to enter into compensating balance agreements during fiscal year 2015. Since the mid-1980s, state laws permitted cities and towns to enter into compensating balance agreements with a bank. However, state law prohibits the town's treasurer from entering into a compensating balance agreement without the authorization of town meeting. Brookline Town Meeting has routinely authorized these arrangements. Authorizing the use of compensating balances, the terms of which vary from bank to bank and with the size of deposits left at a bank, provides the town's finance department with a valuable option that it can use when financial market conditions create appropriate value for the town. Historically, interest income from short-term investments was sufficient to cover the costs of the majority of the town's banking fees, and compensating balance agreements did not necessarily make financial sense. Since 2008, however, the low interest rate environment has reversed that equation, and the calculus is such that these arrangements currently are financially attractive. It is estimated by the treasurer that the town saved approximately $15,000 on bank service charges in the past fiscal year as a result of having compensating balance agreements. Given the utility of this tool in providing the town's finance department with maximum flexibility in constantly changing capital markets, and town meetings' history of granting the authorization to enter into these agreements, the Advisory Committee unanimously recommends favorable action on this article. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion on page 3-1, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 4 deals with closeouts or rescissions of unexpended balances of past appropriations. There are no such closeouts or rescissions before us. Therefore, no action is moved by Mr. Bors, seconded by Mr. Franco. Those in favor of no action under Article 4, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 5. Article 5 deals with the payment of unpaid bills of prior years. Here again, there are no such bills outstanding, and therefore no action under Article 5 is moved by Ms. Daly, seconded by Mr. Bors. Those in favor of no action vote under Article 5, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 6. Motion under Article 6 is found on page 6-2 at the top. Move that the town elect to establish an additional property tax exemption for fiscal year 2015, etc. In the words of the motion, moved by Mr. Franco, seconded by Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Franco.
Good evening. I'm still Ben Franco for the Board of Selectmen. Article 6 asks town meeting to continue past practice in double tax exemptions, property tax exemptions, for certain groups of Brookline taxpayers: widows, disabled veterans, seniors, and the blind. State law declares these groups of taxpayers eligible for a base exemption automatically and allows for individual municipalities to authorize larger exemptions if it is deemed appropriate. Town meeting must annually vote to increase the property tax exemptions above the statutory minimum, and this body has done so for over 25 consecutive years. Town meeting may not add or subtract groups of taxpayers from the state-mandated list, nor may town meeting elect to double the exemption afforded to one group of taxpayers and leave another at the statutory minimum. While many groups' members receive their exemption automatically, the members of certain groups must pass tests which may include means or occupancy before they receive a tax exemption. The cost to the town of increasing the exemptions above the statutory minimum again is relatively minor, roughly $60,000 in the coming fiscal year, and will be funded out of the tax abatement overlay account. While the cost is small, the impact of adoption of the increased tax exemptions has on the lives of some Brookline residents, some of Brookline's most vulnerable residents, is profound. The selectmen unanimously support passage of Article 6.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
Good evening, Chuck Swartz from Precinct 9, speaking for the Advisory Committee. I would just like to add to the comments that Mr. Franco made that the cost of $60,000 represents an increase of just $3,000 over what we had passed last year. The Advisory Committee voted 18 in favor with 2 abstentions for favorable action for Article 6 to continue the practice of increases to these exemptions. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion on page 6-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 7. The action under Article 7 will depend upon, which relates to funding of the Lawrence School, I think it's Lawrence, yes, will depend a little on what we do under Article 8. So we're going to take them in reverse order. That is, we will deal with first with Article 8, the budget vote. Then at the end of the budget vote, we will deal with Article 7. The budget motion is that of the Advisory Committee. It starts on the pages 8-70 to 8-82 of the green supplement, with one exception. The Advisory Committee, immediately before tonight's meeting, reinserted into the budget vote the former item 58 dealing with the feasibility study for improvements to the Driscoll School. And with one exception, and the new item 58 can be found on page 2 of the blue supplement number 2. And the Advisory Committee adopted the original language of item 58 and added a proviso, further provided that no money may be committed to or expended prior to the close of the 2014 fall town meeting. So the motion of the Advisory Committee consists of the entire budget motion with this paragraph on the second page of the blue supplement substituted for the old item 58. The motion is made by Mr. Boers and seconded by Ms. Banka. And I call first on Mr. Boers for his annual budget address, and then we'll hear from Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Boers.
Good evening, Harry Boers speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. Budgets are generally viewed as sort of dry financial documents. We dress them up a bit with prose, notably through budget messages from the town administrator, from our school superintendent, from the selectmen, from the Advisory Committee. But budgets are themselves prosaic, just with a slightly different language. And they communicate something essential. They communicate our choices. They communicate and they tell a story. They provide a narrative of our community's needs and our values and our aspirations. And through the seemingly dry and emblematic prose of a budget, they articulate that narrative of how we as a community will attain our collective vision. A budget has a story. A budget has a voice, and as we all know by now, it is a voice that is becoming more strained. Now, fiscal discipline has helped Brookline maintain a relatively strong position, and this year we've been very fortunate in that we're benefiting from a modest increase in healthcare premiums. Otherwise, our voice would be all the more labored. But the school department costs, largely driven by increasing enrollment, continue to outpace our capacity to increase revenue, adding pressure financially and to a certain degree socially. This year's budget is a transitional budget. Last year, you will recall that we characterized it as a bridge budget to allow the town and the school department time to formulate an ideal, sustainable budget and propose an approach to contend with some of our burgeoning school population issues. Since then, much work has been done. There have been 2 committees to consider population and space and finance and policy issues. We also expect to have recommendations around a potential override this spring. While this work is nearly complete, the task has yet to be finished. So before us in the FY15 budget is our transitional budget. It does maintain services and even allow for some modest expansions. But while it is a balanced budget, it is not fundamentally secure beyond FY15 in that this year's unusually favorable healthcare premiums provided us extra budget capacity. And that is something that we can't bank on for the future. But favorable conditions do support this budget. Our available revenues increased by 2.7% to $235 million, and they come from a variety of sources, more than 3/4 of which, though, come from property tax, primarily our residential tax. They increased 3.4%, that's inclusive of new growth, to $182 million in total. Local receipts are up by nearly $3 million to $22 million, and state aid is up to $17.6 million. It's a welcome 5.8% increase, but it is still below what it once was. State certified free cash for FY15 decreases by $2.9 million to $7.1. $5.1 million of that is available for appropriation, and we anticipate $4.1 of it going toward our CIP. Now, counterbalancing the $235 million in revenues, of course, are our expenses. Our departmental expenditures increased by 3.7% to $154.5 million. That's allotting $68 million to the town side at 2.1% increase, and $88 million to the school department, which is a 4.9% increase. Non-departmental expenditures are about flat at $63 million, and they include reserves, debt service, insurance, most significantly employee benefits at $50.5 million. Additionally, there are the revenue finance special appropriations that I mentioned a moment ago. That's the CIP at 4.1. And then finally, coming right off the top, are our non-appropriated expenses of $8.1 million. They include the abatement overlay and state and county assessments, which means they include $785,000 to the county, for which we receive $785,000 to the county. As a service provider, most of our costs are in personnel, that is wages and benefits, and personnel and benefits costs account for about 79% of our general appropriation. So that's most of what we are spending our money on. The personnel increases by 4.1% to $123 million. And again, this is largely driven by the increase in school enrollment, which necessitates additional staffing. This year, there are 3.65 added FTEs within the town portion of the budget, which increases some supports and services, though over the past few years, the town has been able to hold down the number of FTEs a fair amount. Personnel levels on the school department side, though, reflect a much different dynamic. Again, the schools have had to grapple with the effects of the surging enrollment, and the total increase within the school department, that's from all funds, is approximately 35 FTEs to 1285 total. And there's an expanded discussion and analysis of the school department budget, which appears in your combined reports, so I won't go into more detail. Our personnel costs, of course, are more than just the wages. They're also the benefits. This year, our benefits costs increased by only 0.8%, and that's again held down by the low increase in healthcare premiums, but again, it's an anomaly that we should not expect to repeat itself. This year's healthcare premium rate increases by just 1.5% in aggregate, It's a far cry from what it was a few years ago when we entered the GIC in 2010. But while the rate of increase is only 1.5%, the full increase to our healthcare expense is 2.1 to $25 million, driven by the increased number of employees. For FY15, we expect to have more than 3,000 enrolled employees in our program, 1,374 on the town side and 1,671 on the school, 49% of whom are active and 51% are retired, and the retiree portion is continuing to grow. And as you know, as an employee retires and is replaced, it will add people to our rolls. It's also important to point out that we are currently in the second year of a 3-year agreement with our employees. In the current negotiated agreement, the town covers 83% of the cost of the premiums, while the employees cover 17%, as opposed to the statewide average, which is 70% municipality and 30% employee. Budgetarily, there's a $270,000 savings for each 1% reduction in the town's share. And so this can make a significant impact on our health care and our OPEB costs going into the future. And as for OPEBs, the calculated unfunded liability for our retiree health obligation is $190 million. We're expecting a new actuarial analysis soon. For FY15, we are recommending an appropriation of $3.3 million to the OPEB liability fund, which in January stood at $21 million. If we maintain discipline, we should reach what is referred to as the ARC. That's the annually required contribution within 10 years. It's quite a success story, but it also requires continued diligence on our part. The pensions are the other retirement benefit. Currently, there are 3,361 employees in our system. As you will recall, the Retirement Board voted to reduce the assumed annual rate of return on our investments from 8.15% to 7.75%, though there are many who maintain that this assumed rate should be even lower. The town is on a schedule to fully fund its pension obligation by the year 2030. The current unfunded pension liability is $176 million, and it is addressed in this proposed budget with an appropriation of $17.8 million. Our budget, of course, is not entirely dedicated to personnel, but to capital costs as well. And as you may recall, our financial guidelines call for us to invest, with the addition of free cash, the equivalent of at least 7.5% of the prior year's net revenues. For FY15, that level is 8.4%, or a total of $18 million. And the town anticipates investing approximately $318 million over the next 6 years toward our CIP. Now, this will depend, of course, on decisions that may arise as we respond to the increase in school enrollment and our space needs. This year's CIP continues our commitment to things like streets and sidewalks, parks and playgrounds, and technology, among the other things that we rely on daily. I won't elaborate on each item because it appears in the combined reports with the description, but I will briefly mention a couple. There's $4.6 million that's slated to cap the Newton Street landfill. The front portion will be capped and the rear portion will be partially capped. There's $1.2 million for the Village Square circulation improvements, with a recommendation for the authorization of a Section 108 loan. That will be discussed when we get to that line item. But it's a project to reconfigure the area in Brookline Village where Walnut and High and Pearl and Washington Streets all come down into Route 9. In addition, there's $1.75 million for classroom capacity, and, as you are all quite aware by now, $1 million from the overlay reserve surplus to fund a feasibility and schematic study for a potential devotion school addition. The school, excuse me, I keep saying devotion, Driscoll School. Slight difference. The school department believes that we need to expand the school from what is currently a 3-section to a 4-section, like most of the other schools in town. In a moment, I will come back to this and speak into a bit more detail because we reconsidered this line item again about an hour ago. But it does bring me to the final issue that I would like to speak to this evening, which is our schools. Right now, our educational institutions are suffering from system stress. They're strained by an unprecedented and sustained surge in our school enrollment. Since 1990, there's been a system-wide cumulative enrollment growth of more than 1,800 students, and since '06 alone, there's been a 35% increase, with the enrollment surge now going into the Brookline High School. What were once quaint neighborhood schools with small classes have now grown as classrooms have been added through new construction and the conversion of existing space. So we must understand that schools of 500 students are likely a thing of the past. But it doesn't mean that we can't preserve our system of neighborhood schools. Now, the solutions will not be easy, nor will they be inexpensive, and it also may involve reconsidering existing policies. They will be hard questions, they will be hard decisions with real consequences, and decisions that will require significant community input as well as a measure of sacrifice from everyone. Our school department is the largest and the most complex of our town departments, financially and structurally. And while its budget this year manages to reinforce some positions and in fact expand some programming, it does so with much risk in that it is ultimately an unsustainable budget, relying on serendipitous healthcare premium savings and one-time funds such as reserves. And it really has no capacity to contend with the continuing increases in student enrollment. So while we have concerns with the inherent risks in the school department's budget, we also realize that we cannot simply stand still and that we must advance education in Brookline. So while budgets are an expression of shared priorities and aspirations, they are constrained and tempered by the levels of our resources, the funds we have available, or the funds we are willing to or can make available. The determination of that level will be one of the most important decisions that we make in this next year, as we will likely be considering an override in the spring. It's a decision that will define Brookline, but clearly, deliberatively, and responsibly, we'll make that decision as a community. For this year, though, we have a balanced budget proposal in front of us, one which the advisory committee respectfully submits with a recommendation of favorable action. And at this point, I would like to loop back to the Driscoll feasibility and take what have become muddied waters and make them as clear as I can. But I will tell you that we considered the budget, we reconsidered that line item, and we reconsidered it again this evening. And we have the motion that you see now on the blue sheet. So let me just speak to the issue generally. The proposed feasibility study, as you know, has engendered significant concerns among many Driscoll parents. Driscoll is not adjacent to a town park like many other schools, and the parents worry that an addition may be too large and that it will, among other things, result in insufficient space. Expansion and renovation at Driscoll is part of the town's larger strategy of expand in place to contend with our growing population. Heath, Lawrence, Runkle, now Devotion have so far been part of this effort, as will Pierce. Now, there is no specific plan or design at this time, but item 51 would fund a feasibility study and specifications for a possible project at Driscoll with the goal of bringing the school up to a full 4-section building. That means adding from 7 to 12 additional classrooms. The Driscoll community and the school committee continue to meet, and the selectmen are facilitating a process to ascertain all views and concerns as well. With this backdrop and some updated information, the advisory committee reconsidered this item in the budget and recommended that it be brought back for consideration in the fall. And that went out in the original supplements to you. On the 20th of May, we voted by 10 to 8 to 1 abstention to support a motion that would have taken the $1 million in overlay surplus funding for the line item on this feasibility, moving it over to the Lawrence School project under Article 7, and thereby free up $1 million in bonding capacity that town meeting could tap at its fall town meeting and vote then for a feasibility for the Driscoll School. Now, within the advisory committee, I should tell you there were very strong and diverging opinions. Many maintain that a feasibility is designed to answer the outstanding questions, a process that would serve both the town and Driscoll community. They point out that it is part of a thorough and comprehensive school building master plan, and that the appropriation language specifically states that funds may not be expended prior to the receipt of an MSBA invitation. The expand in place model is part of a solution to accommodate our growing school population, mostly in North Brookline, and like other schools, Driscoll needs to be part of that. And they believe that a feasibility will help determine not just what is possible, but more importantly, what is proper. They think that this sends a strong message to the MSBA and that the wrong message could critically impair our entire approach to our school system. Now, those supporting this original amendment maintain that there is in fact no urgency. As we haven't yet heard from the MSBA, it's not likely that we will get word in July or August. The MSBA meets in September, again on November 19th, with town meeting likely to meet on November 18th. A worst-case delay would be about 7 weeks. And they point to MSBA's own published guidelines that warn municipalities against appropriating funds for feasibility study prior to receiving an MSBA invitation, though it does not prohibit it. Importantly, though, they feel this approach allows town meeting and others time to review and consider the Override Study Committee's report, any additional information facilitated by the Selectmen's efforts, and possibly any recommendations of any long-term community needs study. Now, since that original recommendation, some who oppose the committee's view have noted that bonding the funds for a feasibility study would require a 2/3 vote of town meeting and therefore would set a higher bar than a simple majority vote that's needed for the overlay account funds. So in an effort to address that concern, the advisory committee is now offering an amendment to the Board of Selectmen's motions by adding the words, "and further provided that no money may be committed or expended prior to the close of the 2014 fall meeting." The advisory committee's amendment to the Selectmen's motion would preserve town meeting's options to vote the funds again, should there be concerns based on new information or changing circumstances. However, town meeting's approval is not required. In other words, if town meeting did not raise any objections to the commitment of the expenditures at the 2014 fall town meeting, the feasibility would move ahead. And the selectmen always have the option of convening a special town meeting in the interim if they feel that there is urgency. Finally, the advisory committee believes that this will allow the Driscoll community and the school committee the time and the space they need to work through and understand the requirements and circumstances of a project at Driscoll, all keeping with the published guidelines of the MSBA itself. And on that vote, our vote was 11 in favor, 10 opposed, 1 abstention. So as you can see, we are pretty evenly split on this. And you will hear a different view from the selectmen any moment. And I would add one last comment before stepping away from the podium, which is thank you to you all and the community. This has been a long and engaged conversation, as you know, a lot of thoughtful comments back and forth, and it speaks to the spirit of town meeting. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein.
Good evening, everybody. Ken Goldstein for the Board of Selectmen. And let me first start by congratulating Selectman Franco, Selectman Daley, who are elected and newly elected, and to all the new town meeting members, my congratulations. Also want to add my welcome to Jocelyn Ham Murphy, our new town council. Jocelyn's a new face up here, but probably not a new face to many of you. She's been with the town for only 30 years and 21 years in town council's office, so well qualified for this position. Also, one more acknowledgement. Chuck Flaherty's in the room. I can see him all the way in the back there. He has been our library director for 21 years. He's announced his retirement. And stand up, Chuck, and receive our gratitude, please. Final preliminary thank you is to my colleagues who have elected me chairman of the Board of Selectmen. It is a huge and humbling honor to serve in this capacity and an honor to serve in this community with so much exceptional human resource. That's all of you. And as we'll soon see, so little apathy. It's one thing we don't have. All right, now to the budget and a couple more thank yous before we really get into it. Thanks also to Town Administrator Mel Kleckner, assisted capably and very ably by Deputy Town Administrator Sean Cronin, Assistant Town Administrator Melissa Goff, and also to School Superintendent Bill Lupini, Assistant Superintendent Peter Rowe. All the members of our management team for preparing this thorough, transparent, award-winning financial plan that forms the basis for the 2015 budget, which is before town meeting tonight. Thanks also to the Advisory Committee for the thoughtful and detailed review of the proposed $263 million budget, and to Chairman Boers, Harry, always a wonderful job. Clear explanation of the component parts, revenues, expenditures, and how they've been balanced. This budget represents the cumulative implementation of sound fiscal policies and budget discipline. The framework is the financial plan and the underlying fiscal policies that guide it. And you should all refer to page 6-33 of the combined reports to understand and review those policies. Brookline is one of only 14 municipalities in Massachusetts to receive a AAA Moody's bond rating. This bond rating is important. It means that we borrow money at lower interest rates, which in turn means that we can do more to improve and maintain our infrastructure. This justifies investment in real property and produces a strong tax base. This makes the high quality of community that we enjoy sustainable, and we hope to continue sustaining it. We achieve this rating only with sound fiscal management policies which are rigidly adhered to. The critical ones, in my opinion, are the use of free cash only for one-time purposes, the maintenance of minimum reserve levels, dedicated funding for capital expenditures, capital projects, limitations of the amount of debt, and funding of all unfunded liabilities. That's your OPEBs and pension liabilities in particular. This general fund budget represents an increase of 2.7% over fiscal year 2014. The growth in our operating budget, which excludes the use of one-time funds such as free cash, is 3.5%. Property tax is still our largest revenue source. It's up 3.4%, including new growth. As you know, Proposition 2.5, which we operate under that proposition, our tax levy each year is limited to 2.5% of the prior year's levy, except for new growth. New growth, therefore, is a critical piece of the equation. And that's something to bear in mind as we consider proposals such as Brookline Place later in this annual town meeting. State aid for schools has increased as the state has begun to fund the aggregate wealth model for Chapter 70 aid. This increases aid to an amount at least equal to 17.5% of a community's foundation budget. General government aid in general has increased 2.8%. Overall, state aid is still below fiscal year 2008 levels. Actual amounts are uncertain because the legislature may change local aid appropriations in the final state budget. We anticipate a modest gap, if any, and can make adjustments at the fall town meeting if necessary. Local receipts, by the way, are about 10% of operating revenues and are up 2.9%. Local receipts, for those of you unfamiliar, are meals taxes and hotel taxes and other fees collected by the town. Our expenditures match revenues, with personnel costs accounting for about 80% of the operating budget. That includes total compensation, or wages plus benefits, and includes group health insurance, pensions, unemployment, life insurance, and workers' compensation. Health insurance costs, one of our biggest employment-related expenses, are increasing by just 2% this year. Further proof of the wisdom behind entering the GIC just a few years ago. Enterprise and revolving funds are being charged their share of total compensation costs. That's a problem that's been corrected from past years. Operating budgets in town departments will increase by 2.1%. However, the pressure of school enrollment, as we are no doubt going to talk about, and the need to provide additional teachers means that school operating budget is up nearly 5%. There are some slight increases in staffing on the town side of the budget as well, most notably the creation of a zoning administrative assistant. Other staffing changes includes insourcing our HVAC maintenance, and this will save the town and school budgets a total of $83,000. We're also insourcing the IT help desk, which is cost neutral at the present time, but should save money in the long range. There are a number of initiatives included in the FY15 budget, all of which are detailed on pages 8-19 through 8-23 of the combined reports, and I refer you to those provisions. Notable among them are potential changes to the town's solid waste program and energy efficiency measures and IT investments. And those solid waste changes will be coming up quite shortly, actually, so stay tuned to your Board of Selectmen agenda for that. Education is the town's largest service and apparently very much in demand. Our excellent school system is a main attraction to our town, and it's why your local realtor will tell you that homes in Brookline are bought up at a furious pace, often at purchase prices above asking price. If you're a property owner in Brookline, you've no doubt seen strong appreciations based on the limited supply and a demand that's driven largely, not entirely, but largely by schools. By now, you've heard of the large enrollment growth in our school system. As a result, our schools now account for more than 56% of our total operating budget, a percentage that will rise as enrollment increases. School staffing is up by approximately 35 full-time equivalents to provide teachers for additional students and classrooms. Steps were taken to help the school budget maintain programs and fund certain enrollment costs. Initially, the financial plan proposed by the administration proposed to raise an additional $1 million from revenue from parking meters and parking violation rates, and to allocate that $1 million fully to the school department in order to effectively close the structural budget gap for another year. A couple of weeks after the town administrator presented his financial plan, the GIC announced more favorable health insurance rates, and that enabled the town to avoid raising that $1 million in new revenue. In effect, the $1 million savings in health insurance has now been allocated directly to the school budget. The end result is the same, an overall school budget allocation of $86.8 million, or an increase of 4.9% from the fiscal year 2014 budget. And this brings me, of course, to the single biggest challenge facing Brookline today, and frankly, the main area of contention in this budget, and that is school buildings. Last year, Selectman DeWitt, in her budget message, described for you the intense effort underway jointly by the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. They formed a committee known as B-Space, the Brookline School Population and Capital Exploration Committee. I, along with Selectman DeWitt and Selectman Wyszynski, served on that committee. And for more than a year, B-Space scoured this community to identify and weigh alternatives for providing sufficient classroom space to house our growing school population. Some of the alternatives explored included a new school emphasizing a particular subject matter, such as a performing arts school or a math and sciences school, or changing the K-8 model that has long been in place in Brookline by opening a new town-wide school for a particular grade. So sixth grade was entertained for a while. These programmatic changes were all determined to be too risky, either because they could not be counted on to draw the voluntary participation that was needed, or because the pedagogical basis for the plan was not equal to our current standards. Of course, we also studied the real notion that we should build a new 9th K-8 school. In fact, Selectman Wyszynski, school committee member Rebecca Stone, and I formed the subcommittee which explored possible sites for such a 9th school. I got to tell you, until you sit down with the maps and the data, you will never fully appreciate what we had to go through, and you're going to have to take our word for it that the only way to provide a 9th K-8 school and maintain our neighborhood school model is to build it in North Brookline. Not the old Lincoln School, not the Baldwin School, not the Lynch Center, not South Brookline. Unless you're willing to permanently take parkland for this purpose, which I simply am not, there is absolutely no viable location. And yes, we've looked at the TJ Maxx site, for example, and a lot of other sites too. The only practical solution that we came up with is what has come to be known as the Expand in Place plan. And that is maximize classroom space in the 3 schools where the school population density is centered: Devotion, Lawrence, and Driscoll. HMFH, the consultants who were working on concepts for the high school, looked into this issue for us and confirmed that fortunately there was additional expansion capacity at these 3 locations. A devotion expansion and renovation was already underway, but as it turned out, more could be done. 4 new classrooms at Lawrence, which had recently undergone a major renovation, were also already planned. Driscoll, as a matter of concept, and concept only, had the room and was in need of renovation anyway. After further public discussion, the expand-in-place concept became the B-Space recommendation, and it was soon adopted by the school committee as well. An application has been made to the Mass School Building Authority, that's MSBA, to accept the concept and to begin the process of evaluating a Driscoll project for funding. We await their determination currently. Upon a favorable determination, the next step in the process will be a feasibility study and the formation of a building committee. Those who feel that decisions about Driscoll School are moving too fast or have already been made should understand that it's only after acceptance by the MSBA and formation of a building committee that the real work will begin. Real concerns about open space, parking, traffic, neighborhood impacts will all be intensely studied and evaluated, as they have in the past processes. In fact, the Board of Selectmen has authorized the hiring of a consultant to conduct an interim study that will be used to gather and report on various concerns of Driscoll School stakeholders. This study will be used as a guide to help inform the feasibility study. Only when and if the town and the MSBA are satisfied with the project will it proceed. But the first step is MSBA acceptance. So here's a small reality check. Brookline is not the only community in Massachusetts seeking MSBA funding. The MSBA has competing applications and will reject or delay an application if support for the project among official organs of town government is wavering or if they find that the nature of our school program is in flux. We experienced just such a delay in our application for the devotion school. Article of Appropriation number 58 in the proposed fiscal year 15 budget is $1 million for Driscoll School feasibility study and schematic plans. This appropriation would only be spent if MSBA accepts the proposal. The Advisory Committee recommends a budget where the Driscoll School appropriation will be held until the next town meeting. The unanimous Board of Selectmen knows that restriction of the appropriation is not harmless. The MSBA does not operate in a vacuum. They know what we do here today. If this budget is approved without the appropriation, or with undue restriction on the appropriation, such as re-examination in the fall, there is strong reason to believe that the MSBA will question the town's commitment to the project or to the overall model for education in Brookline, and they will not accept it. I'll add that if this project does not move forward, the school committee will eventually be forced to make some very unpopular program changes, which very well may undermine the successful school system which we have come to appreciate and depend on. We do not yet know the total financial impact of providing school enrollment increases, but we do have a plan. The report of the Override Study Committee is expected in a few short weeks. Little doubt that some difficult choices will have to be made. In the meantime, please do not imperil the Driscoll School renovation and expansion. Trust that the process will not just help our town cope with growing school enrollment, but will also result in improvements to the school, just as the process has improved Runkle and Heath in very recent years. The unanimous Board of Selectmen recommends and moves favorable action on its motion, which is located on page 4 of the green-colored supplement. This motion amends the budget vote offered by the Advisory Committee under Article 8. Our amendment maintains special appropriation number 58, which funds the Driscoll School feasibility study and schematic design without restriction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, the green supplement contains the Advisory Committee's budget recommendation. Consists of, with the exception of item 58, which can be found on page 2 of the blue supplement. The first section of the budget, the budget vote begins on page 8-9, I'm sorry, page 9 of the green supplement. And the first section of the budget vote are the so-called conditions of appropriations, which are the first 12 paragraphs of the budget motion on pages 9 through 12 of the green supplement. Then we will take up, in the order in which they appear, the special appropriations capital items that appear on page 13 through 17 of the green supplement. And when we get to item 58, we will be voting on the advisory committee's version of the Driscoll feasibility appropriation and the selectmen's amendment of that portion of the budget, which Mr. Boers and Mr. Goldstein have explained to you. We then get to free cash, which is paragraph 14 of the budget vote on page 17 of the green supplement. And finally, to the budget table, which is table 1 on the 3 pages, unnumbered pages subsequent to page 17 of the green supplement. We will take comments and questions about the conditions of appropriations as the first order of business. Before that, let me just mention that the budget motion is offered by the advisory committee in a motion made by Mr. Boers and seconded by Ms. Benka. So on the conditions of appropriations, paragraphs 1 through 12 on pages 9 through 12 of the green supplement, are there any questions or comments? These are, as they are labeled, the conditions of, certain conditions of the appropriations that are made in the budget. Then we turn to the special appropriations starting on page 13 of the green supplement. And as we go through these, I will read off the amount and the purpose, and if you have a question or comment about any particular special appropriation, please come to a microphone as we reach that item. Before you ask your question, however, you should look at the expanded version of the special appropriation items, and these are found on pages earlier in the budget write-up on pages 8-57 through 8-72 or so. So match up the appropriation on which you have a question with the expanded version of explanation of that particular appropriation to make sure that your question is not answered in the counterpart explanation. So, proceeding with special appropriation number 34 is for $270,000 for townwide hardware and software. $65,000 for commercial area improvements. $580,000 for the replacement of fire engine number 5. $325,000 for making extraordinary repairs to fire stations. $40,000 for renovations to the training facility located at fire station number 6. $50,000 for feasibility and concept study of renovations to the Coolidge Corner Library. $30,000 for bicycle access improvements, and $50,000 for a study of MBTA traffic signalization under the following conditions. And there are 3 conditions, and Dr. Vitolo moves to strike.
I do not
these.
move to strike, but I do have a question about
Okay,
I'm Tommy Vitolo. I am a town meeting member from Precinct 6. Mr. Moderator, my question is about the 3 conditions, the item itself is to appropriate $50,000 to pay for a study. And the three conditions all seem to instruct what town will do after we have spent the money on the study. That is, after we've spent the money, we're still being told what to do. And it doesn't seem to me that items 1 or 2, despite being good ideas, can possibly be binding, because they're telling us how to spend money not being appropriated in this budget. And item 3, despite being, I think, a little bit silly that we should tell the MBTA that they shall present a plan, also seems to describe what we'll do in a future budget. Mr. Moderator, is it appropriate or binding for this budget to instruct town meeting on what to do in a future budget?
Well, I'd like perhaps Mr. Papasturgeon to enlighten us about that. You understand that Dr. Vitolo's concern is that the conditions don't seem to be conditions to the expenditure of the $50,000, but conditions for subsequent events.
Andrew Papasturgeon, Commissioner of Public Works. I didn't place the conditions on it, so I really don't know whether they're appropriate or not, to tell you the truth.
Are there any foisters of those conditions in the room? Dr. Vitolo?
Well, Mr. Moderator, if no one will rise to defend the conditions, and if they are non-binding, I do move to strike them.
Is there a second to that motion? All right, then Dr. Vitolo is proposing to strike the words "under the following conditions" and paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 of item 41. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries by a vote of 224 to 2. Item 42. $1,550,000 for the rehabilitation of streets. 43. Mr. Rosenthal, did you have a question?
Yes, I do, but Ms. Jeswicki wanted to ask something about 41, I think, if, anyway.
Ms. Jeswicki?
May I yield to her?
Joyce Jeswicki, Precinct 9. On Article, Paragraph 40, for bicycle access improvements, I don't want to spend a dime until we have enforcement of the rules of the road with consequences for the many, many cyclists who ignore all the rules of the road. It doesn't matter what we do to make it safer. If they don't keep themselves safe by adhering to the rules of the road, and if we don't enforce the rules of the road, cyclists aren't going to be safe.
Thank you, Ms. Jeswicki. We'll take that as a comment. It's unlikely we're going to be able to resolve your problem at town meeting. Mr. Rosenthal?
I hope that's not the same for my question, but it's Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9, and co-chair of Brookline PACS. On item 42, which is the street improvements, Mr. Moderator, I have a question about traffic calming expenses, and I could either do it now or during the departmental budget, but it seems to fit here, I think. So with your assent, I'll raise it here.
Well, you don't need my assent, but let's see if we can't get an answer to your question, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, thank you. So my question is that in past years, there's been some dedicated money for traffic calming, and I think it's the last couple of years that it's been collapsed into this item, to my knowledge. That's my first question. And my second question is, if I am allowed to collapse my questions, is whether or not there is a sense of how much money would be dedicated to traffic calming out of this figure. And I have a specific question about Stedman Street by the Devotion School.
Why don't you hold that? You've already got two on the floor. Mr. Ditto or Mr. Crane?
Todd Crane, Transportation Administrator for the town. After the Transportation Board in 2012 revised the traffic calming policy and guidelines based on a recommendation from town meeting, one of the added additions is to attempt to leverage ongoing projects or stage our planning at the same time that roads are being reconstructed. So we're not reconstructing roads and then going back in 2 years later, 3 years later, and reconstructing them again to install traffic calming measures. So our office has been very busy. For those who want to sort of keep an update, we on our website is a status report that you can download in the transportation files for traffic calming. Some of the things we have been doing, we have safety improvements which were recently approved by the Transportation Board and will be put out by the Engineering Division at the intersection of Woodland and Heath Street. Those were actually funded by as part of the mitigation package for the Chestnut Hill Square project, which was in the city of Newton, somewhere to the tune roughly about $120,000. We are also investigating right now a traffic calming request on Heath Street, which is the portion between the city line and Newton to Hammond Pond Parkway as a result of the construction, once again, at the Chestnut Hill Square. And as part of the mitigation package, they have set aside $50,000, which is already being given to the town to construct any elements that are approved by the Transportation Board. Another project that we recently actually just got a positive vote last week was improvements along Fisher Avenue, which was requested by that neighborhood as well as Newbury College, and those would be constructed as part of the roadway reconstruction project. So we're leveraging other monies. Some of the projects that will be coming before you as standalone items within future budgets are the improvements at Woodland and Hammond Street. You remember last year you approved money for a study. We recently have a consultant who's starting that study, and then that would be coming to you as a standalone project.
You might as well stay there, Mr. Corain. Yes, Mr. Rosenthal?
All right, just one quick comment on that. I would hope in the future there's an opportunity to see some of that in the documents that come to town meeting as an identifiable topic. But if I could move to my second question. On Stedman Street, this town meeting passed a resolution, I don't remember if it was a written resolution or some kind of an amendment, but anyway, supporting, I'm sure you remember it, supporting further look at Stedman Street and revisiting the issue of bumps instead of neck downs. And you told me earlier that that was not done, and it was based on a 5% decrease in the speed. And I have to question where that 5% figure is written in stone and why the neighbors and town meeting members from Devotion School area weren't consulted on that.
One of the stated goals by the Transportation Board when they approved that project and went through that process was a 5-mile-per-hour reduction in the 85th percentile speed. So not a 5%, but a 5-mile-per-hour reduction. Right. In what was, I believe, if I remember off the top of my head, 25 mile per hour at the 85th percentile speed. So we actually reduced it down to the state law, which is 20 miles per hour in a school zone, using those, the curb extensions and brand new crosswalks, as well as the new solar 20 mile per hour school zone flasher. Since we had met the goals of the Transportation Board at the time, we did not move forward on looking at another study. We moved on to the next project.
Thank you. Mr. Spiegel?
Stanley Spiegel from Precinct 2. I'm reminded that in the November 2011 town meeting, the town meeting voted to refer to the Transportation Board to study things like the Green Street pedestrian walk signal as part of a more general Coolidge Corner survey. I just wonder, we haven't heard much about what's transpired since then. Is any funding incorporated here, or has anything transpired yet that we should know about?
At that time, town meeting actually allocated $25,000 towards the study for a consultant. A consultant has recently been brought on board, and that study is beginning now.
Those 2.5 years have gone by. Well, I just mentioned.
It's a slow consultant. Thank you, Mr. Corain. Item 43, $290,000 for the rehabilitation of sidewalks. 44, $515,000 for the conversion of town-owned streetlights to LEDs. 45, $90,000 for the design of the renovation of the Pierce Playground. 46, $295,000 for the renovation of playground equipment, fields, and fencing. 47, $85,000 for the rehabilitation of town and school grounds. 48, $170,000 for the removal and replacement of trees. 49, $100,000 for the rehabilitation of roadways within the Walnut Hills Cemetery. 50, $60,000 for school furniture upgrades. 51, $320,000 for mobile carts and mounted projection systems. Mr. Davis.
Jonathan, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jonathan Davis, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, I would like to know why this budget calls for almost $250,000 for carts, and what terrible things would happen, Mr. Moderator, if this were stricken?
Dr. Lupini. Well, I'm not sure under whose auspices. This money is to be spent under the auspices of both the Selectmen and the School Committee. Is there a, can somebody on the Board of Selectmen address? Okay, here comes the Brain Trust. Dr. Lupini?
Good evening, Kevin Stokes, Chief Information Officer. Specific to the carts and the mobile projection units that we're talking about in the schools, really the goal of this fiscal year is to establish equity within all the schools and all the educational spaces we have now that we have parity across all the classrooms that we have currently.
So the purchase specifically...
Could you identify yourself?
Sorry, Bill Lupini, Superintendent of Schools. The longer-term plan calls for the projection in each classroom throughout the district. This is the beginning of that plan. The carts are to make accessible to classrooms throughout our schools the computers that we're purchasing in operating budget. It's actually listed in the school department operating budget. So the goal eventually is one cart of computers available for every 4 classrooms. This will bring us to a level of more equity across the district right now. So we're purchasing computers out of operating budget. The carts will allow accessibility for different classrooms within schools.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Davis. Mr. White?
Hi. George Abbott White, Precinct 9. I have a couple of questions, I guess one for the moderator and then for the particular heads. I'm sort of new to the game here, but as I go through this, my colleague mentioned, you know, here's $250,000. When you total these up, these are tens of millions. There's quite a bit of money here. So my question is, for example, number 4, how specific is the information for what we're appropriating or money for? Is the information for this, just like the previous comment, is available somewhere else? Specifically, for example, town-owned street lights to LEDs. I take it LEDs are you know, energy conservation. Do we have a plan for replacing these? And if so, where can someone like myself find that? The school furniture upgrades, generally in the system, a particular school. Again, is there a plan, a systematic plan for what is ADA? As I say, I'm new to this, but I think if people ask me, and we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars here, I'm not sure where to get answers. Maybe other people know this, but I don't. So can I get some help on this?
Well, I'm not sure we can, to the extent that these items are described in greater detail on pages 57 through 70 or so.
60. I'm sorry, in the supplement or in the regular?
No, in the 8- starting on page 8-57 for item 34.
Okay.
And going through 8-61 for item 62, you will find expanded versions of these. And I think each department that's proposing to expend these funds has a more specific plan yet. But
So if I were a question, I could go to the particular department?
That's what I would suggest you do.
Okay. Good. Thanks very much. Question answered.
Item 52, $65,000 for ADA renovations to town and school buildings. Yes, ma'am.
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3. Like the previous speaker, I'd like a point of clarification. I understand that we basically split the town revenue with the school department, maybe 52%, 48, something like that. So what I'm asking is, when we appropriate something like school furniture or fill in the blank, any of these ADA adaptations and so forth, is that coming out of the town budget? So it's adding to what we give to the school budget?
It comes out of the, it comes out of the town revenues. It's neither a budgetary item for the town or for the schools. It's a capital item and governed by it's at the instigation of the capital improvement program that these items are offered to town meeting each year.
Thank you.
Item 53, $250,000 for improvements to elevators in town and school buildings, facilities. 54, $160,000 for energy conservation projects in town and school buildings. Item 55, $730,000 for building envelope and fenestration repairs to town and school buildings. I think that means windows. 56, $375,000 for roof repairs and replacements in town and school facilities. 57, $300,000 for improvements to life safety systems and building security in town and school facilities. 58. Once again, item 58 is found on page 2 of the blue supplement. That is the advisory committee's item as part of the advisory committee's budget, with the further proviso that no money may be committed or expended prior to the close of the 2014 fall town meeting. That item is, there's a proposal by the Board of Selectmen to amend that item by deleting that further proviso, which is in bold and underlined on page 2 of the blue supplement. That's moved by Mr. Goldstein and seconded by Ms. DeWitt. Now, the differences obviously between the positions of the advisory committee and the Board of Selectmen have narrowed considerably in the last 2 hours. I had a large number of speakers signed up in support of the Board of Selectmen position and a smaller number in support of the advisory committee original position. And I'm not sure whether and to what extent these, the people who have signed up on to speak on these issues are still anxious to do so. I think before as we lead into this discussion, I've asked the school committee and superintendent to provide an overview of the school strategies dealing with increased enrollment, a presentation that we would normally hear when we get to the school budget, but I think it's relevant to this issue and we might as well hear it now. Ms. Ditkoff? And Dr. Lapini, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. My name is Susan Wolf-Ditkoff. I am the new chairman of the school committee. I will try not to refer to this as hazing. It is my pleasure to present the FY15 budget with the superintendent. So for some reason, I offered to do the tough messages, and the superintendent gets to tell you great stories about kids. Next time, I'm going to insist that we swap that. And he do the tough stuff. But first, and I know we all want to talk about Driscoll, and I promise we will, but I do want to step back and talk about a few things first, just to frame where we are. First, just where we are as a system and the overall context that we're facing. The second is the FY15 budget, and then the third is the capital implications and Driscoll in particular. And then Dr. Lupini will bring us back to where we started, which is sort of why we're here and the students that we care so much about. So let me start with the context. There are three headlines that I would leave you with, some of which you already know, and I won't belabor. The first and most important is actually not enrollment growth. It is the fact that we've actually redone the school strategic plan this year. There are a number of distractions that are going on in terms of capital. They're important distractions, but I would say more important to me and to the school committee is the actual education that we're providing to our children. So we had an outstanding group, very diverse, parents, non-parent residents, educators, teachers, and others who really focused on refreshing our values, refreshing our goals, looking hard at the information about how our students were doing a terrific job looking at national experts from around the country in terms of educational technology, in terms of social emotional learning. And it's easy to skip past this and focus on the numbers, but really it's why I get up in the morning and do this. It's why most of my school committee colleagues do as well. So it's a terrific plan. There are a couple of sheets in there. I think there's a packet somewhere. You can take a look at the values, you can take a look at the goals, and it really is something that guides us. It guides our budgeting process, it guides the school improvement plans, it guides how every teacher in every classroom prioritizes his and her time with students. So we're very excited about it. The second thing that I'll say is that if anybody wants to talk about that instead of the capital project, that's great. Feel free to ask questions. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is enrollment growth does continue unabated. 35% growth in our K-8 schools. We won't go through it all, but I will say that next year's projections are above the 630 kindergartners that we've been projecting. I think we're at 645, but that's not final yet. Obviously, we'll see who shows up in September. And for years, we've been asking, is this a bubble? And there have been lots of opinions on this. And the good news is that this spring, we had a team from MIT who delivered a report, and there are lots of regressions in it for all the MBAs who might want to take a break from taxi medallions and focus on something else for a little while. And the good news is that they gave us an answer, which is we're going to keep growing. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but that's the bottom line if you don't have an MBA. Finally, you should know that the schools have already tightened their belts significantly to deal with the growth. I think that's a surprise to many people when you actually unpack the numbers. So a couple of quick facts. First, the school budget has grown for sure, but the cost per student has been absolutely flat for the last 5 years. Absolutely flat. And so it's pretty amazing, even as collective bargaining has increased and other costs have increased. And part of the reason for that is that the schools have taken somewhere between $2.5 to $3.5 million worth of cuts and efficiencies over that time frame. So I think there was an efficiency committee on the town side, and they totted up their numbers, and it was roughly the same range. No one had ever actually totted up all the schools' numbers, but that's pretty much the range. And there's a detail in the back of the superintendent's budget message. It's this 16-page long 20,000 word document, but I think the highlights are in a packet that might have been handed out. Anyway, $2.5 to $3.5 million worth of cuts already and efficiencies. So we already know that our educators are doing more with less. And then the third thing I'll say is that the town has given the schools a little bit of extra money every year. It's called the enrollment kicker, and that's terrific. But what we know is that that's about a third of the cost, covers about a third of the cost per child. So about 2/3 of the cost is getting picked up by the schools, and whereas it's this compression factor, which is why we're needing to make these cuts. So again, to sum up, lots of kids, more coming, and we've already absorbed a lot of really important cuts and low-hanging fruit along the way to make the budget balance. So the second thing is just about the budget itself. How do we construct it? What are some of the values? I get this question a lot. What are the values and the visions that we use to guide this process? The first, there are four, there are actually many, but I'll pick out four for you to think about. The first is that Brookline values equitable neighborhood K-8 schools. You've heard it a lot, and it's a top priority of longtime Brookline residents. Realtors tell us that people move here because they don't like the uncertainty of other districts. They don't like busing. They don't like inequity. There's a lot of things they don't like, and that's why they move here. And so now we've already taken some steps to adjust this a little bit in terms of enlarging our buffer zones, but still trying to stay committed to neighborhood schools. The enlargement of the buffer zones helped give us some additional flexibility in assignments to do it in a slightly more optimal way and more efficient way, while still preserving neighborhood schools. But we are firmly committed to that. And I will just say it's an expensive choice, right? If you could take any child and put any child in any school in this district, it's absolutely true that you would not have an enrollment, you would not have a space crisis. We wouldn't, and the superintendent, the deputy superintendent have been saying that for years, but since nobody has seriously thought about removing neighborhood schools, that's not really something that we're seriously looking at. But we are, again, looking at ways to, around the edges, enlarge buffer zones and use buffer zones differently. The second is that Brookline values educational excellence and small class sizes. Again, this is expensive. We consistently drive resources to the classroom, which is pretty much the only thing that educational experts agree on. Again, realtors tell us it's a top reason why people move to town, it's why many parents move to town, it's why many of you moved here. And again, I think one of the questions is how flexible could we be on this? And just so everyone is clear, we have already taken steps to increase class size. Class size is increased by, on average, 1.5 students per class. So it's not that people had no idea that small class sizes were expensive, and it's not that we haven't done anything about it. We have. I think we're unwilling to pop them up too high, because once you see classes in the 28, 29 range, you have a lot of different negative effects. For the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is sort of value set number 3, which is equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment.
Well, now, Ms. Dickoff, you've now taken 8 of the 10 minutes that you told me that you and Dr. Lupini would need for this presentation. So just a warning.
Okay, thanks. In terms of equitable environments, what I will say is that, again, those things cost money, as do paying excellent teachers and supporting them both personally and professionally. So where are we in terms of this budget? I think the capital piece is what we're all going to debate in a couple minutes. Number one, we have a multi-year expansion plan that the MSBA is partnering with us on in terms of the Devotion Project, and we have another SOI in terms of Driscoll in front of them. We're already using Old Lincoln pretty much consistently for more than 10 years. We've added more than 50 classrooms out of our current spaces. We've already added at Runkle, Heath, and Lawrence. And so the real equity argument for Driscoll is, given that there's a renovation needed and expansion just within its own catchment area, how do we do that? How do we get those real answers to the community as quickly as possible? Because I think we all believe that although the communication clearly was not what it needed to be, and we regret that, we can't stop. We need to move forward. And so how we move forward, what the feasibility project looks like, how the community is involved, how we have real information to allay fears is exactly what we need right now. So maybe we get one heartwarming story from the superintendent, and then we'll wrap up and answer questions.
Well, I think we'll have questions other than on this particular budget item when we get to the school department budget, but what I think we need is a little more focus on this particular proposal, Dr. Lupini. Yes. Yeah, that's what's on the floor.
Oh, okay. No, so we are going to talk about Driscoll. All right, fine. So, all right. So I think that, let me do this in a couple sentences, and then we can take some questions. I think regardless of whether or not one ultimately supports the idea of expansion at Driscoll, that any delay or pause button on the feasibility study itself means a delay in answering these very legitimate questions that people have. And so the current proposal, unfortunately, still delays us. The advisory committee proposal still delays us if we get an answer from the MSBA before November. And we don't know if we would. Number two, it's not just a delay of time, but it requires another vote, and actually that creates more uncertainty and anxiety rather than not knowing if good decisions are going to be made. And then the last thing is that we need to be sending a signal that this is really a plan that we are continuing to commit to, and that there are many important details about what's feasible and how it might work that need to get worked out with the community in a co-owned process with the community, but that we're not throwing the entire plan that we committed to the MSBA to away. And so I do think that even the advisory committee's proposal, though it's much closer, still doesn't quite get to alleviate the concerns that a number of people have with the proposal. So we still support the Board of Selectmen's vote.
I'm looking at the handout, which I guess I don't have any objection to, but generally speaking, those of you who wish to distribute handouts within the auditorium must clear them first with the moderator. This is nothing I've seen before, and as I say, it seems to provide you with some statistical information and a little bit of backup to what Ms. Ditkoff was talking about, so it has my retroactive approval. But please keep that in mind in the future, Mr. Spiegel.
This is a question to Ms. Through the moderator to Ms. Ditkoff. One of the last statements you made was that the advisory committee position requires a second vote. My understanding is that it allows a second vote at the November town meeting. It does not require a second vote. Do you disagree with that?
I think the discussion that I understood was that that it would allow for it. I think it would be, my question back would be, if there wasn't another vote, is that just tacit agreement?
Well, what happens if there's no other vote on this subject under the advisory committee's formulation is that at the close of the 2014 fall town meeting, the expenditures of the appropriated funds can commence.
So no second vote is required?
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Moderator, I have a question about this handout, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I'm Robert Falk, Precinct 4. Just so the way...
Closer to the mic, please.
It wasn't properly Xeroxed. The end of every page is cut off. Just a little point of interest. And perhaps the individuals behind this document could put it online or something so we could see it in all its glory. Thank you.
We'll do that for you. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I'm going to commence a debate, to the extent that there is a debate, by calling on Ms. Lodish. And you can take the position one way or another on the amendment, or a position one way or another on the entire appropriation. We'll have a vote on both when the debate concludes. Ms. Lodish.
My name is Pam Lodish. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 14. And I stand here to support the advisory committee's proposal that we delay any expenditures until the end of the November town meeting. I totally agree that something needs to be done at Driscoll, and I totally agree it's in serious need of renovation. But the question of expansion is another matter. Before joining the advisory committee, I was on the school committee for 9 years. And what I valued among most everything, all the work I did, was the commitment to consensus And that's what I see missing from this project, and in the concern raised by the parents at Driscoll School. Let me try to say this. Consensus for me is so important because as we look to the future and look for overrides, we don't want to disenfranchise significant groups of our community. When I was involved with the Runkle School renovation, although the school is lovely, the process was not, I was not impressed with the process in the sense that it split our neighborhood very badly. And as we split the neighborhood, we lose and disenfranchise people. I'm hopeful that if we delay this project, if we work toward consensus before we spend the money, we have a much greater chance of success, and we have a greater chance not to disenfranchise people when we ask them to vote for an override.
Thank you, Mr. Witt.
I'm Betsy DeWitt, speaking for the Board of Selectmen in favor of our amended version of item 58. We believe that time is of the essence and that having funds in place will save the town valuable time and money. If the MSBA does not approve the town's application, or if the town were to decide not to proceed with the Driscoll project, the funds cannot be used for any other purpose without action of town meeting. Brookline chose to seek funding in advance so that if the MSBA invites us into the eligibility period, we would be ready to start up ASAP with the MSBA's process. This is important because including this school year and through September 2018, 30 additional classrooms are needed for kindergarten through 8th grade. Actual kindergarten enrollment has jumped from a very steady average of 425 in 2005 to 600 in 2012, and potentially as many as 650 in September 2014. There are now more than 1,000 additional students in K through 8, and Brookline High School will grow from 1,750 to 2,200 students by 2018. Let me review the Driscoll MSBA process, which has been lengthy, thorough, but I will have to say inclusive. The Devotion Building Committee was appointed in June 2012. It's 18 members. It includes the school principal, the devotion principal, school committee member, a selectman, a member of the building commission, representatives of the devotion PTO and parent community, and representatives of the neighborhood. The Devotion Building Committee worked with the MSBA to submit a preliminary documentation for an educational program with cost estimates. Town meeting then voted to fund the MSBA feasibility stage, which is comparable to what we're proposing now for Driscoll, in November 2012. In the meantime, the Devotion School principal and staff have worked with parents to develop educational program criteria and principles for the project. They have considered different configurations for classrooms, for grade level education clusters, for teamwork spaces, for access to special education and instructional specialists, for common spaces such as cafeteria, gymnasium, library, and auditorium.
Mr. Witt, could you remind us what this has to do with Driscoll?
It has to do with what you will go through once the feasibility process begins. This is what we are voting money to initiate. We would vote, Article 58 would vote money to initiate this process for Driscoll. And I'm just trying to explain what will happen. May I continue?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for the explanation.
Sorry, I thought I'd made it clear. So anyway, all of these things are part of the feasibility process. In addition, they've looked at things as complicated as travel time for the younger kids to outdoor play areas and to common spaces. And Sorry, lost my place. All right, the Driscoll School Site Council, PTO, parents, and neighbors have all engaged and been involved in discussing the impacts, in addition, on pedestrian access to the school, on traffic, parking, children's safety, and some particular special site conditions at Devotion that include the Devotion House and the historically significant 1913 section of the Devotion School building. Subsequently, the MSBA put the project on hold after learning B-Space was exploring alternatives to a K-8 model. After the final B-Space report confirmed the K-8 model, the architect was hired and the feasibility study was developed completely and submitted to the MSBA. Now I'm in March 2014. So optimistically, a decision on the final design option should be completed by October of 2014. Remember, we started this process back in 2012. Equally optimistically, the school would be ready for occupancy in 2019, which is 1 year later than was originally hoped and projected. All of this is to say, and this is my explanation, Mr. Moderator, that any delay in the Driscoll process means more delay in addressing classroom needs at the high school and then at Pierce School, and it increases, and enrollment increases are a community-wide issue. They affect all of us, and we should all participate in the solution. It needs a collaborative community approach, so please do not vote to delay the Driscoll feasibility funding.
Thank you, Mr. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Werner Lowy, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, and Carol Schraft, who is the longtime, now retired principal of the Driscoll School, asked me to read a statement on her behalf. She's actually working tonight in Springfield, doing an evaluation of a school for the State Department of Education that requires evening work as well as daytime work. So she asked me to read a statement, and of course, she's had no chance to modify her remarks based on the vote 2 hours ago. This is her statement. My name is Carol Schraft, and I was principal of Driscoll School for 26 years, from 1980 until 2006, and I'm a resident of the Driscoll School District. I regret that I'm unable to be here tonight. I am asking you to vote to delay the $1 million allocation for the Driscoll School feasibility study until November. In my professional opinion, the plans for district-wide school expansion have taken place in the absence of sufficient thoughtful discussion of educational values and vision. What do we want our schools to be? Do we want a town of supersized schools, or are we drifting there by default? I know that other schools of 750 or more students already exist in Brookline. However, even those who are supporting the expansion of these in large schools concede that this is the second best alternative. Their first choice is to build a 9th school. Having run a K-8 for 26 years, I believe that increasing the size of a school to over 800 students diminishes the value of having a K-8 school in the first place. The original intention behind K-8 schools in Brookline was that they be sized so that the school could function as a whole and that each school would serve as a centerpiece of the community. It is possible to have a large number of grades and a reasonable number of students, or a small number of grades, as in the high school or a middle school, and a large number of students. However, you cannot have both. At some point, you no longer have a K-8 school, but rather a de facto elementary school and middle school housed in the same building. If that is the case, then there are probably better ways to run middle schools, and those options should be explored. In terms of the Driscoll expansion in particular, the process has lacked basic fairness to the community. This project was proposed in August and voted in early September. The first meeting with the Driscoll community was held after the vote to proceed. Never before in Brookline has a project of this magnitude been undertaken without the inclusion of the community it will impact. And the school committee has been steadfast in its refusal to make equity of common areas and outdoor space a condition for proceeding. The objections raised by the Driscoll community are not those of a small group of abutters, but rather the concerns of the majority of the school community. Over 430 parents and neighbors have signed a petition objecting to the project as planned. When major decisions are made in this manner, the result is what you see here tonight. I urge you to vote to pause. Waiting until November will not impact Brookline's standing with the MSBA, nor will threaten other school building projects. To the contrary, the delay will give all the parties a chance to consider all options and proceed in a more thoughtful manner. Brookline values its schools and has always been proud of its first-rate educational program. I was proud to work here and have my 3 children educated here. We can do better than this.
Mr. Hochleitner? And Mr. Stoll, will you please come forward and sit in the front row?
Brian Hochleitner, Precinct 6. I'm here because I am part of the problem. I'm a parent. I've got a child at Pierce School and a son in Beep who was at Driscoll last year and is now at the Trust Center. I ran for town meeting this year in part because I knew that we were going to be talking about these issues, and I wanted to try to help represent some of the parents out there that desperately want to help find a solution. I'm a commercial real estate lawyer. Before I started practicing law, I worked in city government in New York, and I was the chief of staff for capital projects for New York City parks. And so I've had a lot of experience in the planning of capital projects, public capital projects. And for those who have seen the backyards in New York City, you know that people are very focused on their parks there, and maybe not quite as contentious as Brookline schools, but it's a pretty contentious area to be building consensus around what a project should be. And so I feel like I've seen that play out in a number of different areas. I think it's really important to focus on what it is that we're talking about. We're not talking about building a project. We're talking about doing a study on whether it's feasible to build the project, or what, more specifically, what components are feasible, what parts of the renovation are necessary or feasible, how much expansion is feasible, what are the costs and benefits of designing the project in one way versus another. These are all things that I think will help all of us as time goes forward and we're trying to make some of the tough decisions about funding and voting on an override and making ultimate decisions about funding, that we need that kinds of information. And delaying that process for 6 months does have a cost. It has a cost, I think, potentially in our relationship with MSBA. But I think also, you know, these things take a lot longer than they sort of start out on paper in terms of the schedule. I mean, I've been attending B-Space meetings and override study committee meetings and paying close attention to this stuff for a while, and I've just slowly watched as the sort of target date for completion of projects was 2017, and now the latest estimate for Driscoll is that construction would be completed, even if we go forward right now, 2019, and we're running out of space. So I think, please remember that I think there are a lot of legitimate concerns that have been raised by the Driscoll community. I think that funding this study is going to help facilitate that dialogue back and forth. But please also remember that there are a lot of children in our other schools. You know, at Pierce, it's a little hard for me to listen to someone make a statement that it's not possible to have a great school that has, you know, close to 800 students, because my kids are at Pierce, and it's a great school, and I think the size of the school is not something that, you reach a certain magic number and it's no longer possible to have something great. I think people are resistant to change. It's understandable that the Driscoll community is taking time to really kind of come around to thinking about this issue, and there's a lot of fear about what's out there. But I think that a feasibility study, which is going to help get an architect, have them work with the community, talk, have a dialogue, and start presenting options that people can then respond to, is better than waiting another 6 months or however long it's going to end up being, sitting on our hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mr. Perry Stahl in the auditorium? Yes, would you come forward, please?
My name is Perry Stoll. I live in Precinct 13. The facts are simple. This body is voting to take $1 million from our wallets, put it in a piggy bank, label it break in case of invitation to eligibility, and then number 4, wait until we hear from the MSBA. So the idea that we're going to speed up the feasibility study is just not true. So it is not a vote to speed up the feasibility study. It is not a vote to send a signal to the MSBA, and is not a vote to keep the devotion project on track. So let me clarify a couple things. The arguments to fund it now are either we're going to send a signal to the MSBA that we're serious about Driscoll, or if we vote against it, that we're not serious about doing Driscoll. Now, let's take each of those. The fact that we're going to send a signal to the MSBA that we're serious about Driscoll is just false. It's simply and patently untrue. The MSBA guidelines on voting feasibility studies are very clear. And the reason Mr. Cronin could not get the correct language for voting a feasibility study in advance of being invited to invitation to eligibility is that they won't help you, because they advise you not to do it. And the reason is, as I've come to realize, is to avoid the appearance of favoring wealthier towns. Smaller towns can't afford to put $1 million in a piggy bank and wait. So to be equitable to all towns in the state, they evaluated an invitation, as they told me today as I called them, strictly based on the needs and the urgency of the projects in the town. That is how they will evaluate us. It is not on being able to put away and send a signal to them that we are ready to fund it. Secondly, the idea that we are going to send them a signal that we're not serious, again, it's just not true. We do need to secure the funds after we get invitation to eligibility within 9 months, and if we need more, they can actually give us more. We can put a placeholder in the town warrant for November to get ready to vote it as soon as we're invited. Again, a special town meeting is also another option. Anything that we can be doing in advance of being invited to an eligibility for Driscoll, we can do right now. So anything we can do. Correspondingly, we can't do anything to speed up the feasibility study. We won't have the result of the feasibility study by the time we discuss, maybe next May, the override. Lastly, the other 2 pieces that will slow down the project if we don't fund, or correspondingly will speed up the project if we fund. I hope I addressed those. We won't slow down the project. We can vote and fund as soon as we hear, assuming we hear, right? So why am I up here? We've asked the school committee numerous times to engage with us and help give us some comfort that there are conditions that would make it not just a foregone conclusion, but truly would be feasible. As an example, if Driscoll ends up being the worst play space per kid on average in the district, could we please be not too much worse? Right, that is the nature of the request we're asking. We've heard frequently tonight that education is the reason many people move to Brookline, and I agree, it's why we moved here. It seems related to the comments I've heard the school committee make that we know how to build really big schools well. We know how to do this. And frankly, I'd offer that the jury's still out on that. In 2008, we had no schools over 700 kids. Right? The Expand in Place project we're talking about has 2 schools over 1,000, 1 over 850, that's Driscoll, bigger than any school in 2008. So the idea that we know how to do this really well, I would just argue it's a little premature to make that statement. So again, I'd ask you to wait until November to fund this. Thank you.
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rebecca Stone, Precinct 3, and member of this Brookline School Committee. This has been a very difficult debate for everyone because there is, in fact, a great deal at stake. Others have spoken to the process and sequence of events that got us here. It has been a long road. Since I joined the school committee in 2005, kindergarten enrollments have gone up every year, and not just in one spot. Every one of our elementary schools has grown dramatically. You've heard over and over again tonight that we have added well over 1,000 students in our elementary grades in that time. I doubt it would have been anyone's choice to grow this much, but the growth has happened. And as Harry Boers said, schools of 500 are most likely a thing of the past. The good news is that we know how to run terrific, successful, beloved schools with the larger numbers. Just ask the students at Lawrence, Pierce, Baker, and Devotion. Driscoll School, contrary to what some have said, is in the heart of the growth. It is the fastest growing elementary school by percentage, and it has experienced the third largest absolute growth of all of our schools. If we put every child from the Driscoll district and the buffer zones associated with Driscoll at the Driscoll School, it would already be a 4-section school. The Driscoll project is a part of a master plan voted by the school committee in September after a townwide committee met intensively for 9 months, holding public hearings and hiring external consultants. The plans build on the extensive expansion of space and capacity that has already happened through projects at Heath and Runkle, and it sets in motion additional growth at Devotion, Driscoll, Lawrence, and eventually at Pierce. Far from ignoring future needs, the master plan incorporates the long-term objective of bringing our pre-Ks back into our buildings. It addresses the need to anticipate growth from future developments, and it speaks to the needed expansion of the high school. In short, the Driscoll expansion is one piece of a well-considered, long-range plan to address overcrowding across our school system. Further delaying one piece of the solution will mean greater negative impacts on all of the schools in the system. And the Advisory Commission's new motion, even though it does not require reconsideration in November, certainly suggests the town meeting will want to reconsider and possibly revote. There have been many valid concerns raised about the impact of this project on future open space and on parking and traffic concerns. These are really important issues. They are always priorities in a feasibility study that we do. And they will be priorities in the feasibility study for the Driscoll School. It is fortunate that we are learning already about enlarging a school in a large commercial area from the feasibility process going on at Devotion, where traffic density, student safety, and teacher parking have been of primary concern during the feasibility stage, as has how we are going to accommodate 1,000 students in open space after a new school is grown to meet the needs of those students. As we have said repeatedly, the school committee will not accept a plan that leaves Driscoll significantly disadvantaged regarding open space or other key components of a quality school environment. We have said it repeatedly, we will not accept that condition for Driscoll. I know that many people concerned with this project have heard from Driscoll parents who felt as if decisions had been made without them. I went through the Lawrence renovation with my kids, and I know how it feels to be on the outside of major decisions affecting my family.
1 minute.
We should have done better with the communications in the past, no question. And we've been taking strides to improve communications with the Driscoll community now, and we will continue to do more in the future. If you vote yes tonight for the Selectmen's motion, a feasibility study will still be able to take advantage of the Override Study Committee report and the Selectmen's facilitator. Those reports are due in June and September. But we probably can't do any of the things that we need to do to make this a great project and a great school experience if we don't approve the appropriation for the project tonight. I urge you to support the Selectmen's motion for the Driscoll feasibility study and let us move this important project forward. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have no one else signed up to speak against the appropriation or in favor of the advisory committee's time proviso. I have 5 people signed up to speak in favor of the selectman's position. And my sense is that we may have heard everything about this debate that it's possible to hear, but I'll take a couple of questions. Mr. Gladstone?
Just to be fair, Gladstone from Precinct 16.
Thank you.
It's not a question, it's a comment, if you'll allow it.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. 2 experiences to share. One is I, as an attorney, represented some neighbors of the Lawrence School when they were planning out their additional classroom space. The only way we could have possibly have had that conversation is because design professionals were paid to draw up various configurations of how extra space would look and what the impacts would be. Only because we had various options to mix and match and compare was the neighborhood and the school able to reach a consensus that everybody could support. And so this type of study, as soon as possible so that the community can have every ounce of time available to go through that very difficult process, is absolutely essential. The other thing I will say is with regard to Driscoll wanting to stay small. I get that. Well, let me tell you what one of the other schools is going through, the Baker School. My son is in the jazz band. The day before the Thanksgiving break and the winter break, the whole school went in the only place that could fit it, which was the gymnasium, to have the play and the jazz band and the speeches and everything else. The parents, if they could make it, would all go and fell, and it was the best time of the year. Well, the school got so big that we weren't able to stand in the gym anymore. So whoever could fit in the balcony amongst all the old desks and everything and could squeeze in with the desk could go and watch. Well, then that became not an option because that dusty closet area became learning space because we needed to have the space because we had that many kids at Baker School. I think everybody can give a little in every district in order to solve this problem. Thank you.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, thank you. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9. I have infinite regard for Werner Lowy, but I am a little troubled by his comment that voting for the advisory committee motion would not impact Devotion School, and there has been some concern in the Devotion School community that the state officials might act, whether it's irrationally or politically or whatever, and that this could have an impact on Devotion School. So I'd like to have some response from the school officials whether this might, whether there's any reasonable possibility as opposed to absolutely won't impact the Devotion School funding.
Dr. Lupini?
So there's not really an answer to that, right?
What we
know is that last summer we received a letter while the B-Space process was still going on that said you're not permitted to go forward because you don't have a longer-term plan. So it's really up to MSBA, right, and others to look, depending on what we're doing here, and decide whether we have a long-term plan. We did in September, right? It'll really be up to them to determine whether we have a long-term plan, and as was said earlier, what impact that has, if any, on devotion and, in fact, reimbursements on other projects that we've done in the past.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hummel.
Amy Hummel, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 12. I would, because we had a Driscoll parent here to speak about one portion of the representative of the parents at the school, I'd be curious if, I believe there was a town meeting member who is also a Driscoll parent who has a different view because that community does not seem to be entirely in sync. And if the town meeting could hear from that perspective also, I think it would be instructive.
Ms. Hatchett? Was this a setup?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, I'm Casey Hatchett, Precinct 12, Driscoll school parent, speaking in support of the feasibility study. As parents of 3 and soon to be 4 students at Driscoll School, my husband and I support the feasibility study and the renovation, and we accept that expansion is necessary not only to get the renovation, but also to address local growth and district-wide needs. I don't fear a larger school, but I do fear a larger school enrollment without the renovation, simply jamming more kids into our substandard school because enrollment in our catchment is increasing. My kindergartner eats lunch at 10:15 in the morning. We are unable to accommodate our school community in our auditorium or other community spaces for meetings, plays, and concerts. And I have 2 children that receive pull-out services that get these services in the hallway because there's not enough non-classroom space for them to have privacy to work on things like reading and arithmetic. My husband and I have been tracking field and tennis court use at the school for years because of an ongoing frustration with our green space at Driscoll. The tennis courts are underused and not used, as far as I know, to host anything specific to our school community like a Driscoll Tennis Club. And our field is closed more than it is open, and even when it is open, it's a dust bowl. Hard compacted dirt with sprouts of grass coming through. Our Driscoll athletes never have the opportunity to host home games for soccer or baseball or lacrosse because no games are ever held there. Years of seeding and watering have never worked, and we support eliminating the tennis courts and using that space to build school use, which will be used constantly and meaningfully. We also support any effort to improve what limited outdoor space we do have, and even less space, if made usable, is more than what we have now. I love the Driscoll community, and I will be at this school for a total of 18 years for all 4 of my kids. In a perfect world, it would already be renovated, and we would continue to be a smaller size school, but the school is in serious disrepair and cannot accommodate the current enrollment. I don't see increasing size as us taking on the burden of other schools. I see it as being part of a solution for our entire school community. As the debate draws on, I feel strongly that it is short-sighted and misguided to attack Metco and the materials fee in an effort to save ourselves from expansion. Many of my peers are concerned about the actual construction time, as much or more so as they are about the increased school size. They don't want to bus kids to other schools, split up where siblings are going, or divide our close-knit community among several locations in, or even as sometimes discussed, out of town. They worry about the quality of education during those 2 to 3 years, as well as the inconvenience of busing or driving to another school. Some of these inconveniences are going to be unavoidable, and delaying now because we, the current school community, don't want to do it and would rather delay, making it the next generation's problem, is simply unfair. I have said several times to my friends and fellow school parents at Driscoll who fear what an expansion will do to our school community this: I loved my family when I had 2 children. I love it more now with 4. I don't think more students and families will tear at our fabric. We have great leadership at our school with Heidi Cook and David Euclid. We have incredibly talented, enthusiastic, hardworking teachers and paraprofessionals, and parental involvement is robust. We are a close-knit community. None of that will change with more families and an improved school. I do have concerns related to parking and traffic around the school. I would like to see a commitment to making our outdoor space usable and indoor common space equitable, and I hope that we can agree on a project that addresses the needs of our students and the school district while ensuring the sense of community staying intact. I am certain our kids will continue to get the same high-quality education during and after a renovation, and that this project would improve so much for the students, teachers, and families at Driscoll who will benefit from more space, better facilities, and increased programming while helping the town achieve long-term goals to overcrowding. There are many strong opinions among Driscoll parents on both sides of this debate. It has been a very divisive year for our community, and I don't pretend to represent the entire school community, but I am not alone in my support of this project.
You have 1 minute.
We have a significant problem here, a wonderful, complicated, and privileged problem of having such an incredible school system that people are clamoring to get into it, and the result will likely be an amazing new school. Let's find a solution to this problem, starting with the feasibility study. Thank you.
There's been a motion for the question. Is there a second? All right, I have on the list of speakers from whom we have not heard Mr. Wyszynski, Ms. Mautner, and Ms. Heller. The motion to terminate debate requires a 2/3 vote. Those in favor of calling the question terminating debate, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries by a 2/3 vote. We vote first on the Selectmen's motion amendment to delete the bold and underlined language on page 2 of the blue. Yes, I can't imagine why you're up here, Mr. Carroll. If there are 35 people who want an electronic vote on this issue, we will have one. This is on the Selectmen's motion to amend the advisory committee proposal by deleting the proviso that no money may be committed or expended prior to the close of the 2014 town meeting. There are easily 35 people in favor. This is the BOS amendment on item 58. Whenever you're ready. BOS amendment, item 58. Well, I'll explain for the third time. We're voting on the advisory committee has proposed item 58 in the form set forth in the middle of page 2 of the blue supplement. The advisory committee's proposal contains a proviso that is in bold and underlined and reads as follows, and further provided that no money may be committed or expended prior to the close of the 2014 fall town meeting. The selectmen move to delete that phrase, the bold and underlined language, from the advisory committee's version of item 58, and that's what we're voting on. A yes vote is in favor of deleting that language. A no vote is in favor of retaining it. Are there any further questions? You can begin the countdown. Okay. Those in favor of the selectmen's motion, please stand and press 1. Those, you may be seated, and those opposed, please stand and press 2. Press 3 if you're abstaining. The selectmen's motion carries by a vote of 176 to 43 with 5 abstentions. On the motion, on the provision, item 58, middle of page 52 of the blue supplement, without the underlined and bold language, those in favor, please raise your hands. Majority vote required. This is on the feasibility study. This is the appropriation for the feasibility study. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those opposed, motion carries by a majority vote. We move on now to the rest of the capital items, and item 59, $1,750,000 for the expansion of classroom capacity in various schools. Item 60, $900,000 for the replacement of fire ladder 2 to be financed by borrowing, so this requires a 2/3 vote. On item 59 for the $900,000 bonding appropriation, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Item 61, $4,600,000 for capping, cleaning up, and or preventing pollution and closing out the rear of the Newton Street landfill. Again, proposed to be financed by bonding under Chapter 44. This requires a 2/3 vote. Those in favor of this bonding appropriation, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 62, $1,200,000 to pay the costs of traffic circulation improvements in Brookline Village and Riverway Park pedestrian and bicycle crossing improvements at Route 9 and the Riverway, to be financed by bonding under Chapter 44, requiring a 2/3 vote. Yes, sir.
A question on this item 62, Mr. Moderator.
Sure.
To whoever you see fit to direct it. That part of Route
Who are you?
Ian Pollenbaum, Precinct 6.
Thank you.
That part of Route 9 going through the village, as everyone knows, is a particularly high-speed and high-traffic area, and particularly bicycle unfriendly as well. The question is whether Public Works contemplates, as part of the revamping of that area, specific bicycle accommodations there, not simply putting some markings on the pavement, but taking advantage of the width and perhaps even separate bicycle tracks at sidewalk grade to separate it from the often hazardous traffic through there.
I believe that's the purpose of the Riverway Park improvements, which will include a traffic light. But Mr. Viola from the Planning Department.
Good evening. I'm Joe Viola, an Assistant Director for Community Planning from the Brookline Planning Department. Currently, the plan is to have the consultant look at whether or not there's additional capacity to do something other than having a bike shoulder on Route 9. The initial plan submitted to the state shows a 5-foot shoulder, and we're currently directing our design team to look and see if there's another possible solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. On item 62, the $1,200,000 bonding appropriation, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Paragraph 14, free cash to appropriate and transfer $5,084,152 from free cash for the purposes A through D. And that brings us to the budget table and the departmental and non-departmental expenditures. As is our custom in this portion of the budget, I will read off the budget items, and if any of you has a question for the department head involved, this is the time to ask it. Please come to a microphone as I get to that departmental budget, and your questions will be dealt with by the department head. So paragraph 1, Ms. Connors.
Are you talking about the selectmen's budget? No?
Yes. Well, let me announce it. It's $671,197 as the selectmen's budget. Ms. Connors.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's Patricia Connors, town meeting member, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, according to the budget book, thank you, Bob. One of the responsibilities of the selectmen is to ensure that historical plaques, street signs, and symbols are maintained throughout the town. Now, Mr. Moderator, the Campaign to Preserve St. Aidan's has, for the last 2 years, attempted to have a plaque installed on the site of St. Aidan's. As many people know, St. Aidan's Church was the baptismal church of John and Robert F. Kennedy and is one of the most historic sites in the town. I'm a member of the Campaign to Preserve St. Aidan's, and we have met with various members of the planning staff and have had various ideas about how to get this plaque installed. Most recently, Selectman DeWitt informed me that she was going to consider, or she was going to follow up with the developer about this plaque. My question is if negotiations with the developer have reached an impasse, is it possible for the selectmen to pay for a plaque out of their budget, since they are responsible for ensuring that historical plaques are maintained, and to have the plaque installed on one of the portions of the site which is under the control of the town by virtue of conservation restrictions?
Mr. Witt?
I would like to say I apologize that we were unable to come to a conclusion, but we did research the question that Ms. Connors raised, and we know that a design was created, and we know that we thought that the developer had every intention of installing the plaque, and we've had what I apologize for incomplete communications about it. So I guess I would argue that we still have the opportunity to have a plaque installed that was originally, I think the text is something that was agreed upon by everybody. I don't know why they were unable to complete that, but we should continue that conversation, and if it's not possible, then it seems perfectly reasonable for the town perhaps to undertake it. But at least I'd like to try to complete our effort to get the developer to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Human Resources, $523,365. Mr. Friedman?
Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, on page 8-22, there's a reference to new hires in the Human Resources Office, and it says they were there due to demand. Demand includes criminal background checking of construction workers in an expanded capital project. Could somebody please explain why we are looking into the criminal backgrounds of construction workers, and what happens if we discover that a construction worker has a criminal background?
Mr. Ball? Ms. Murphy, the Town Council?
Thank you. Jocelyn Murphy, Precinct 16.
And Town Council.
Yes, I beg your pardon, Town Council. I can respond to that question. Under a statute, the town is required to conduct CORI reviews of all individuals who may come into contact with school children. So I believe that is a provision under which that relates. And then, of course, the HR department would apply its CORI policy. There is a policy that permits, or rather would disallow the hire of employees with certain criminal backgrounds.
So this would only relate to school projects?
No, it would not. It would relate to any project where children may be in contact.
Okay.
So schoolyards, for example, schools, and so forth.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, I would note that the United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the free world, and that a lot of these people eventually get out of jail and are returned to our streets. And it's for their best interest and for our best interest that they become law-abiding, self-supporting members of society. And in order to do that, they need to be employed. And most of these people are not going to be returning to the practice of brain surgery or rocket science. They tend to have limited educational backgrounds, and one of the few areas where they can get employment would seem to be construction, doing manual labor in the building trades. And I think for the town to, what sounds like, in many cases, if the crime had nothing to do with children, to willy-nilly block their path from getting employment is at best heartless and at worst vindictive. And I think this is a policy that needs to be reviewed, perhaps by the Director of Human Resources, Town Council, and the Town Administrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Ms. Cavell?
I'm Kathleen Cavell. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 1. In my day job, my paying job, I work for the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I was one of the people who helped draft the legislation that I believe Town Council is talking about. The law says that in order for contractor employees to work in a setting where they may have direct and unmonitored contact with students, those employees have to be vetted, which means they have to have a national criminal records check as well as a CORI. We are the 50th state to enact a national criminal records check for anybody who works in a school. Public school employees of all sorts have never been vetted nationally until now. The legislation does require that. If a person, including a contractor employee, is going to have direct and unmonitored contact with students, that person can be and will be checked through the National FBI Registry. It doesn't mean he won't be hired or she won't be hired. It means that the school, and only the school, will get that information and can make a decision as to who is and isn't eligible for hire in a situation in which they might come into contact with school children. And the whole point of this legislation, it's very narrowly drafted, the governor signed it, is to protect the children in Brookline schools.
Thank you, Ms. Cavell. That's quite clear. Information technology, $1,751,863. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. I have a question about the last, one more question, if I may. I'm Andrew Fisher from Precinct 13. And I'm wondering how construction workers on a project are going to have direct and unsupervised contact with the elementary school students.
Ms. Murphy.
Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council. Clearly, if they're working on projects within a school or a schoolyard, they could potentially have contact with school children.
I think that's pretty self-evident. Information technology, $1,751,863. Finance Department, $2,845,778. Legal services, $823,893. Advisory Committee, $24,372. Yes, ma'am.
Number 8. Number 8. So next.
Town Clerk, $627,632. Planning and Community Development, $765,310. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure. Mariah Nobrega, Precinct 4. Is it possible to get an update on the demolition of the overpass at Route 9 by Hearthstone Plaza?
Mr. Steinfeld or Mr. Kleckner? Mr. Viola?
Joe Viola, Assistant Director for Community Planning. With regard to the overpass, it's intended that we'll be using our upcoming fiscal year CDBG funds to take down the bridge. The selectmen recently voted on our one-year action plan, and the amount we need to move forward with the bridge demo is included in that. As soon as we get clearance for HUD to use that money, we'll be able to go out to bid.
And when do you think that'll be?
We're expecting at the earliest September or October.
Thank you. Police? Go ahead, Mel.
Well,
Yes, Mel Kleckner, Town Administrator. I just want to clarify that our ultimate hope is that with the negotiations with the Children's Hospital for the B2 site, which Town Meeting will take up later in this meeting, that there will be reimbursement for that, and we won't have to expend our valuable CDBG funds.
Thank you. Police, $15,312,691. Ms. Wentz.
Karen Wentz, Precinct 11, town meeting member. I have two questions for Chief O'Leary.
Chief, you might as well come forward. Go ahead.
My first question is about the issue of police having to confront a larger number of mentally ill suspects. I came across an article in April about that, and police having to play the dual role of police officer and psychiatric social worker. So the article mentioned that many towns across the country use a crisis intervention team model. I'm just asking, what program do you use? Do you have specially trained officers?
Chief O'Leary?
Daniel O'Leary, the Chief of Police. The answer to that is yes, we do. We don't have a full-fledged crisis intervention team which has psychiatrists and psychologists on the payroll, and they come out and patrol with you. We're fortunate enough to be closer to the medical center, where we join with the best team, which is put together by the hospitals in the Longwood medical area, where we will call them and they will send somebody out with us if need be. We do specially trained police officers. In fact, last week we had one of our sergeants and 3 of our other officers attend a training on mental health, handling people with mental illness, and it's something that we do care about. It's something that we've worked on, and we just don't do the full-fledged team, like I said, just because we can take advantage of the medical center.
Thank you. My second question is, in March, my landline was out for a couple of weeks, and I was away for the weekend and called in. My voicemail was working because I have Verizon voicemail, and so I called to check my messages, and I had a message from the police department at 11:59 on a Sunday night, and saying that I had called 911 and I should call you back to let you know whether or not I really needed 911 or not. And so I had no phone line. And then I wasn't there. No one was there to make a call, obviously. And so when I got back, I had made a call to the 730-222 number. And the woman who answered said, "This is not uncommon. This happens quite a bit, where disconnected phones, discontinued phone numbers, there's this exchange, or there's somehow they get tracked as 911 calls." So I'm asking how that happens, and I think this needs to be addressed, because if there's police laborers being spent making these calls that are not real calls.
It happens a lot. Part of our protocol is if we get an abandoned 911 call, which we consider that, we do require some kind of a police response to make sure that everything is okay in the house.
Right, but okay, go ahead.
I'm just surprised that you got a phone call and not a visit.
Well, I was a little surprised. You know, what I'm saying is I had no phone service. I had no landline service, so that my landline number came up in your system as my having dialed 911, and I wasn't even there, plus the phone wasn't working.
Well, it must have come up through our 911 system, which is controlled by the state. If we can talk, I can get the phone number, and we have a form that we fill out and send to the state to make these corrections.
Okay.
But it's a database that we rely on from Verizon or whatever the provider is to go with our 911 provider.
Yeah, perhaps you could get together with the chief offline.
Yeah, that's fine. I found it a curious phenomenon.
Mr. Friedman?
Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, I have two articles from the Tab this spring, one dated May 1, about an Arlington man who answered an ad posted on Craigslist by the Brookline police purporting to be a minor trying to find a man for her divorced mother. The Arlington man answered the ad. Undercover police met him in a park where they patted him down and found condoms and a plastic bag of pills, which he said was prescribed for him. He was then arrested. 2 weeks earlier, a Groton man was arrested after agreeing to meet a Brookline police officer posing as an underage person online. The man answered a Craigslist post entitled "Visiting Boston This Weekend."
Okay, Mr. Friedman, we get the gist of the stories. What's your question?
My question is, Mr. Moderator, I read these articles, and when I read about the Groton man, my first instinct was, of course, I can't believe a Groton man did this. I could believe...
Well, I'm not sure.
I could believe that a Brown and Nichols man or an Andover, Phillips Andover man did it, but I could not believe that a Groton man did it. I then thought about it a little bit more, and I realized that perhaps they were not talking about an alumnus of the Groton School, but someone who lives in Groton. So my next thought, Mr. Moderator, and I am getting somewhere with this,
Well, let's get to the question for the chief, Mr. Friedman.
do we have so little of the criminal element who are native to Brookline that we need to be importing them from towns such as Arlington and Groton? My question to myself was, what is going on here? And so, Mr. Moderator, that is my question. What is going on here?
Chief, perhaps you could tell us the purpose of your entrapment policies.
Well, our policy on something like that, it's not entrapment, but we do, as part of normal course of business, peruse the Craigslist. You'll see if you go on Craigslist, there's a lot of different people out there looking for a lot of different things. And not all of it is legal, and not all of it deals with consenting adults. And that's part of what we do when we put an ad like that out there, because we could see some people searching the area, coming from around here, where they're looking for some liaisons with people that aren't of age. We have had a number of arrests with our detectives posing as underage residents of the town, where the people come in here and they make arrangements to have sex traded for money and or drugs. It takes people actually from all walks of life, all ages, but the bottom line is they've been coming in here to have sex with a minor.
And probably all prep schools.
Yes. and you know, and we've had arrests ranging from people with long criminal records, people that are registered sexual offenders, sex offenders that are not registered, and we've had some drug dealers that come in here, and that's their MO. And this past year, we did have a pretty serious case going with 2 juveniles in town that were trafficked, human trafficking and sexual activity. They were residents of the town. They did end up in the city of Boston and out of state. And there was 2 indictments made and several arrests made in that case by members of our detective bureau.
If I may comment, Mr. Moderator?
Yeah, just a quick comment,
Well,
Mr. Friedman.
I'll try and
I don't think we need to drive this one into the ground.
Well, I
at
think
town
we do
meeting.
need to drive this one a little bit into the ground with all due respect.
Well, go ahead.
Because I do
Drive away.
I do not think I am the only person in the audience here to whom the word entrapment is not one of the first words to come to mind. And I will leave it to members of the criminal bar to determine whether it's legally entrapment. But certainly from a moral or ethical point of view, I think it really skirts and crosses over the line. These 2 people from Arlington and Groton, all I can say is in his classic study, The Joys of Yiddish, Mr. Leo Roston was trying to define the difference between a schlemiel and a schlemazel. And he finally determined that a schlemiel is a clumsy person who spills his soup, and a schlemazel is the poor unfortunate on whom the soup is spilled. What we're dealing with here is, I don't know if the guy from Arlington is the schlemiel and the guy from Groton is the schlemazel or vice versa, but they're definitely schmoes. They're fools, and they did do something illegal, but we are not talking Bonnie and Clyde or Ma Barker here. We're talking a bunch of idiots. And if the Brookline police want to be the protectors of eastern Massachusetts, there are more efficient ways to do it. They can go into Boston and patrol the streets there and catch somebody who of their own volition is going to eventually come into Brookline and create mayhem. This guy from Groton lives 40 miles away. He probably couldn't find Brookline if he had to find a map to do it. So I would just suggest that I don't think this is the most efficient use of our public safety resources, and that maybe we ought to find a better use.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. I have a question regarding enforcement to the chief, and I think the question also goes to the building commissioner and to Dr. Balsam. I'm hoping this will help us with an article that we may get to tonight or tomorrow regarding redefinition of what a leaf blower is. My question is whether there has been whether the police department or the other departments charged with enforcing the leaf blower restrictions have encountered any difficulty with enforcement. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is whether there's been any difficulty obtaining decibel meters that are readable in decimal standards that are standard to the United States of America.
I think to answer those questions is we have not had any issues with the meters that we have. We have a couple of like you said, DPW does. I talked to them tonight. They do not have issues with getting them. They are working. The health department has them, and the building department. We know of no problems getting them, maintaining them, and the ones that we have are being used. As far as the enforcement, it's a little bit more difficult, to be honest with you, when we get a call that a leaf blower is in operation, and by the time we get up there, a lot of times the leaf blower is not being operated anymore. It's a lot easier to enforce the time and the date restrictions in the bylaw than it is actually going up there and taking a reading while the leaf blower is being operated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Friedman.
Frank Friedman, Precinct 8. I've asked this question in town meeting in years past, and it remains one of my pet peeves concerning traffic snarling in Brookline, particularly around Coolidge Corner, particularly trying to get from Pleasant Street onto Beacon Street. One's lucky to get through that light at all because of cars that stop blocking the box. Can you tell me in the past year how many cars have been ticketed in Brookline for stopping in the box during a red light?
I don't know that. I know that it is a problem at Pleasant and Beacon, as we do have an officer up there posted during the week, during rush hours from 4:45 to 6 o'clock to make sure the box does not get blocked. It is a severe problem. We did take a look at it because we were looking to possibly remove the officer from that location for that hour and 15 minutes and just let it get run by the lights, but we made a determination that it can't be done. I'd like to see more enforcement, and I think I get the hint, and that intersection should be left open.
I'd pay good money to see someone ticketed for blocking the box.
You know, we did it a lot in Coolidge Corner, as you know, a couple of years ago when before the meters were removed along Harvard Street in front of the Booksmith there, because we were getting a lot of backup and a lot of tickets were issued for blocking the box at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. You may stand down. Fire, $13,005,941. Building, $7,024,504. Public Works, $14,066,549. Yes, sir.
Hi.
And Mr. Papasturgeon, you and your colleagues might as well come forward.
I'm David Lowe from Precinct 11, and I want to start by commending Public Works Department for their excellent job keeping Brookline streets and sidewalks, well, streets at least, clear of ice and clean, and the drains maintained. That's all great, and the staff are generally polite and all, but I have noticed what I think is a culture of letting vehicles idle when they're not about to move one way or the other. I see workers standing around a lot outside an idling truck, gasoline or diesel, and the heat's not on, the air conditioning's not on. And I wonder if there's a program to train or encourage staff to save this precious commodity that we go to war for and drill out of the ground so that we can save our budget and spend it on schools. Thank you.
Mr. Papasturgeon?
Yeah, Andrew Papasturgeon, Commissioner of Public Works. We have a very aggressive policy relative to idling of vehicles. All of our vehicles are posted within the cabs that they shouldn't be idling for more than 5 minutes. There are some circumstances where vehicles must idle, for instance, when they're running safety lights or other types of power takeoff equipment. But when our supervisors are trained that, when they see this, that rectify it immediately. So there are cases where it does get by, I realize that, but we do have an aggressive program in place.
Sorry, follow up, could I ask why, I know the law is 5 minutes, but why wait 5 minutes? Why not 10 seconds?
Well, we were following the state policy that was developed years ago, and we were one of the first to receive a grant from the state to implement a no idling policy, and the policies then had guidelines of 5 minutes. So all of our decals and stickers were printed up that said, do not idle more than 5 minutes. So we could probably scratch them out and put 2 minutes if you want.
Well, I guess I'd like to see or hear a commitment to ongoing training, not just decals and stickers, because it doesn't seem to be working.
Well, we'll rectify that tomorrow.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Davis?
Jonathan Davis, Precinct 10. Question for Mr. Papasturgeon, please. It's really more, it's partly a question, it's partly a request. I understand that, and I know that this past winter was extremely difficult in terms of snow removal, but there's a consistent problem, not just this past winter, but in many, many previous winters, with having the snow removed from the sidewalk along Center Street, along the large and small municipal parking lots, and particularly along the sidewalk that borders the large municipal parking lot on Center Street. And this is an area that is trafficked on foot by old people coming to and from the stores, going Coolidge Corner, coming back from Coolidge Corner, and the condition, even in an ordinary winter, of the sidewalk on Center Street along the large lot and the smaller lot is really deplorable, and I really hope that you will make an effort to keep an eye on that, Mr. Papasturgeon, and make sure that of all places that abutting a municipal parking lot and a big one in a high traffic area, that gets taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Carol Hillman, Precinct 1, Town Meeting Member. I noticed that, first I'd like to compliment you on the hard work you guys have been doing in Riverway Park. It's a tough place to maintain, and I appreciate it. But I see that the Parks and Open Space is suffering an almost 4% budget cut. And I'm wondering, A, where that's happening, and B, what effect that's going to be having on places like Riverside, Riverway Park, Olmsted Park, etc.
Mr. Papasturgeon?
Yes, there is no impact on those types of activities. Town meeting years ago approved an override that allowed for the appropriation of $700,000 annually for the replacement of capital equipment within the Department of Public Works. Depending on the equipment needs of each division, and that includes engineering and transportation, highway, sanitation, fleet services, and parks and open space. Does not include water and sewer. Every year we wrestle with how to balance the expenditure of that $700,000. In one particular year, the Parks and Open Space Division may get a larger share of that money, depending on what their capital needs are. That was actually the case in FY14. In FY15, it's now shifted to the Highway Division, and the Highway Division has a slightly larger piece of that, hence the reduction in the Parks and Open Space budget. So it's only a matter of balancing equipment.
School budget is $86,827,207, and we have heard the presentation in connection with item 58, the capital budget, that's usually presented by the school committee and the school superintendent at this juncture. So Mr. Weiss would like to make a couple of comments, and then we'll have any questions that you have or comments from the floor. Mr. Weiss. And Dr. Lupino, you should probably come forward.
I'm Len Weiss, an at-large member of the advisory committee, and until this moment, the chairman of its school committee for the last 5 years or so. My remarks tonight are as an individual. Enrollment growth, inflation, and unfunded mandates affect the scope and quality of our schools before you even think of enhancements. At the same time, affordability issues limit the achievable. My purpose tonight is not to influence your vote, but to comment that it is time for the school committee and the superintendent to demonstrate their leadership in a process where the override study committee's ideas are being weighed by public opinion, with the good represented by pedagogy and the evil represented by affordability. Affordability concerns have been building. School spending has long been balanced with unsustainable revenues. Last year, the advisory committee coined the term balanced bridge budget when it recommended the reinstatement of $500,000 of programming. It expected that a sustainable education plan endorsed by a voter-supported override would be in place for fiscal 2015 and beyond. Unfortunately, significant issues affecting school building expansion, enrollment growth, philosophy, and programming remain unresolved. Against this backdrop, in fiscal 2015, the schools plan to spend $140 million of operating revenues, and town meeting is being asked to vote in part on $87 million appropriation for the school's general fund, which is short on non-discretionary funding while introducing real growth and held together with some $3 million of unsustainable revenue. I won't mention anything about the capital program and Driscoll. Effectively, what is before you is the implementation of a de facto long-term education plan that makes no changes in philosophy and large-scale programs, and no meaningful rationalization of existing resources, similar to what has been accomplished with special education. It also reflects an incremental approach by commencing spending on $15 million annually of additional non-technology resources and $10 billion of additional technology resources, largely capital in nature. And finally, it sets the stage for a needed sustainable revenue structure that could entail a double-digit % override. The incremental spending has been characterized by the schools as neither a long-term plan nor an ask, and many of the amounts are based on achieving quantitative benchmarks and standards. In the advisory committee's review of the 2015 school operating budget, the school committee and superintendent recognized the need to balance pedagogy and affordability. The advisory committee has been expecting a reconsideration of the foregoing assumptions and projections and the use of qualitative rather than quantitative measurements for incremental resources. This effort might meaningfully reduce the financial burden without unduly sacrificing the quality and equity of education. But we have not seen that effort commence, and the school committee administration have been steadfast in maintaining that bad things happen with financial compromise. In the end, the school committee is empowered to oversee and manage pedagogical choices within the funding provided by the selectmen, town meeting, and the voters. It is responsible for establishing a sustainable long-term plan with qualitative components and measurable expectations and outcomes. The effort at hand is complex, interwoven, and amorphous, well beyond the simplicity of the two framed and highly quantifiable issues raised in the 2008 override. We're not where we should be, and time is not in our favor. The school committee and the superintendent, like the U.S. Army Rangers, have to lead the way. At a minimum, they should stand shoulder to shoulder with the Override Study Committee as ideas are vetted. They should not wait for the final report of the Override Study Committee. And they should not wait for an override number from the selectmen and respond with an education plan driven by an amount. Thank you.
Employee benefits, $50,500,116. Dr. Vitolo.
Tommy Vitolo, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. Mr. Moderator, we'll be discussing taxi medallions someday soon, and with the medallions may come a one-time windfall of, say, $10 to $15 million. When medallions have come up in the past, the suggestion, of course, this town meeting and a past town meeting can't spend money for a future town meeting, but the suggestion has been that all of that money would go toward OPEBs, and that's a perfectly reasonable place, but I wonder if anyone in the front of the room that is advisory, selectmen, or others have had or will have a conversation about spending some or all of that money on override expenditures.
Mr. Goldstein.
Ken Goldstein for the Board of Selectmen. Dr. Vitolo, I can tell you I have, but I don't speak for everybody at this point, so OPEBs are important. I would like to find a way to offset any override with some of that cash if it's possible.
Thank you. I forgot to mention on the school budget that Ms. Frawley, would the town clerk please record Ms. Frawley as being opposed to the school budget. We aren't going to have a separate vote on the school budget, but yes, Ms. Frawley?
Just to make a brief
Who are you?
Regina Frawley, Precinct 16. And for far too many years, a person who spends many cold winter nights at the advisory committee and the subcommittee that hears the school budget, as well as recently the diversity committee, subcommittee hearing that article. I've been hearing for 14 years whenever someone like Len Weiss asks a question about the budget, a very strong, rude attitude of take it or leave it. I decided this year I'm leaving it. It's a symbolic vote, but there needs to be a pushback, and I had no idea Len was going to stand up and say what he said, but I completely support his point of view, and I hope others will take a look, not only vote symbolically, but over the summer start looking at the town side that supplements the school committee, because it's time for us to realize there are other people in town who are suffering. Thank you.
Thank you. Reserve Fund, $2,122,336. Affordable Housing, $170,390. Liability and Catastrophe Fund, $234,839. General Insurance, $371,500. Audit and Professional Services, $130,000. Contingency Fund, $15,000. Out-of-state travel, $3,000. Printing of warrants and reports, $25,000. Mass Municipal Association dues, $11,979. Borrowing, $9,621,757. And the total non-departmental expenditures is $63,205,920, which, when added to the departmental expenditures that we ran through earlier, gives us a total of the general appropriations of $217,744,503, to which we add the revenue-financed special appropriations of $9,415,000 to get to our total appropriated expenditures.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi.
Yes,
You're feeling up.
Ms. Jonas.
Nope. Jennifer.
I'm sorry.
Jennifer Goldsmith, Precinct.
I'm sorry.
I know you're going fast. Into the microphone. I'm Jen Goldsmith, Precinct 11. Closer, okay. I know you're going fast through these. One of the mentions that you had was the printing of the warrants for $25,000, and it comes up over and over in the our listserv. Do we need to get everything on paper? Is there any way around this? There are so many people in the room who would be happy to view this electronically to save the paper and save the money. And then it comes up that there's some specific rule that it must be printed and must be delivered. Is this something you can speak to? Because certainly if there were a way to opt out of this and save this money, I think there are plenty of people in the room who would be interested.
There have been considerable discussions about this particular appropriation and a way to avoid this expense. And as a consequence, there are many items that are published online and available only through the internet, but the printing of the warrants and particularly the combined reports, the considered opinion of those who have looked at this is that it's impractical to rely exclusively on online publication. So I think there is a means of enlisting to get your publication online, but I don't think too many people take advantage of that. Is that right?
Well, given that you have the paper in hand, you're less likely to take advantage of it. Is there a way to opt out?
Well, this has most recently been studied by the advisory committee, I think. Is anyone on the advisory committee has a memory that's better than mine? Mr. Boers?
Harry Boers, the advisory committee. As I recall, it was actually a vote of town meeting. There are a number of things that you can opt out of, but the feeling was, at least with the combined reports, that that was a substantial enough document that everyone should have in hand to be able to refer to at town meeting, that's not one of the things that you can opt out of.
Okay, to resume the summary here, the revenue finance special appropriations that we voted earlier in the budget deliberations of $9,415,000 total to the total appropriated expenditures of $227,503. There are a series of non-appropriated expenditures over which the town meeting has no control that aggregate $8,075,913, adding up to a total budget of $235,235,416. And I now call for an omnibus budget vote, which will cover all items that we did not specifically approve, like the bonding items and the Driscoll School appropriation. On the motion of the advisory committee, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. We now turn to Article 9. I'm sorry, Article 7. Thank you for reminding me. Article 7. The motion under Article 7 is at the bottom of page 1 of the whatever color this is, salmon-colored supplement, to appropriate $1,500,000 for remodeling and reconstructing and making extraordinary repairs to the Lawrence School, and to finance this through borrowing of $1,500,000 under Chapter 44 of the General Laws. Requires a 2/3 vote, moved by Mr. Goldstein and seconded by Ms. DeWitt. Mr. Goldstein?
Good evening again. Ken Goldstein for the Board of Selectmen. Article 7 isn't quite trivial enough to be called housekeeping, particularly since it involves our vital school enrollment problem that we've already talked about tonight. It is, however, a more minor matter. It's a leftover from fiscal year 2014 budget. One element in the plan to respond to the school's enrollment dilemma was to expand the Lawrence School by 4 classrooms. The fiscal year 14 and 15 capital improvement appropriations were for $2.5 million for this purpose. The funds were to be used for a modular construction method to build those classrooms. Unfortunately, only one bid was received for the work, and that bid was far in excess of the appropriation. Plan B is to rebid the work as a traditional construction project, what we call a stick-built project, with an increased budget based on revised architect's estimates. The warrant article would revise the fiscal year 2014 budget to allow an additional $1.5 million in borrowing for this purpose. This budget amendment will enable us to meet the goal of having these classrooms ready for use in the fall of 2015. The Board of Selectmen, by a vote of 4-0 with 1 abstention, recommends favorable action on Article 7. Thank you.
Mr. Boers?
Harry Boers for the Advisory Committee. As you heard, this would authorize bonding $1.5 million to go toward expansion at the Lawrence School. You will recall a couple of years ago, we voted money in order to do what were referred to as modulars or pre-construction. The bids came back twice what we had expected. Rather than $2.1 million, it was $4.2 million. This would bring Lawrence up to being a 4-section school. Lawrence is on a rather small lot, so there's some limited opportunity for doing expansions. There's strong pushback to taking any parkland or doing any expansions. So this would be on the side with the parking lot. At the time this was first considered, it was within 10 years of when the Lawrence School had been renovated, so it was not eligible for any MSBA reimbursements. It's now just outside of that 10 years. On our committee, there were some questions as to whether maybe it should be more classrooms than this. However, because of where it is situated, the neighborhood that it's tucked into, getting it beyond much more than a 4-section school really is not that feasible. This was worked through negotiations with the school, with the town, with the neighborhood. It went through the ZBA. And rather than now doing this as modulars, we're going to go back and take a look at doing this as what is considered traditional building. We expect that it will be closer to $4 million. The $1.5 million may give us slightly more capacity than we need, but given the track record, that's probably a good thing, and the advisory committee is recommending favorable action.
On the motion at the bottom of page 1 of the supplement, yes, yes, sir. Mr. Koff?
Larry Koff, Precinct 3. I'd like a representative of the school committee to inform when the neighborhood is going to get broader information on what the process is going to be. We were very involved in the modular, but there's no understanding as to what the process is going forward.
Dr. Lapini? Or Mr. Rowe?
Peter Rowe, Deputy Superintendent, Administration of Finance. With the approval of this appropriation, we'll be able to move forward for the bid on the contract to issue the bids, so that we'll be mirroring the exact model that we already worked with the neighbors on, so that by September we'll reconvene the group that has been the monitoring group and have those conversations as we move forward. But the plans as drawn are the plans that we originally worked with the neighbors for specifics on, including the siting of the structure, the plantings around the structure, the sight lines, the brick cladding, the roof, the ventilation system, etc.
But I presume that there'll be a foundation this time, and
correct.
Therefore I'm wondering if there is a foundation, whether that structure could be joined with the existing foundation and provide more needed space in the cafeteria area.
No, the design is identical. The original building had a foundation. This will have the same foundation in the very same location, connected by a glass enclosure, so that there are 2 stories of egress back and forth to the main school. So it's an identical model. It's just really the internal structure is not going to be off-site modulars brought in, but it's going to be what we've called stick-built construction on-site.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Frawley?
Regina Frawley, 16. Only 10 years ago, it was expanded, and it was a disastrous for the neighborhood, because actually the children were over on the Route 9 Old Lawrence School for over a year. In fact, closer to a year and a half, because they had to tear down some of the structure, the new structure. My question is, and I hope the answer was in, I don't know what a stick project is. I've never heard that term before in town, and I've followed all the new constructions and additions. Are these children and families and neighborhoods going to be displaced again? Is even one child going to be displaced, forced to go somewhere else while they do the construction? And
the answer is no.
Well, what will be displaced? Will they not be able to play in the field next to it, the park, whatever?
Cars will be moved from the parking lot to the streets in the neighborhood, so we've been working with the Transportation Department on how to schedule that plan, and that will be part of the discussion, as Mr. Koff requested, as we meet with the neighbors on what the process will be.
Thank you. On the motion for the $1,500,000 bonding for Lawrence School, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Passes by a unanimous vote. Article 9. The advisory, what you have before you in Article 9 is a motion with 2 paragraphs, and I'm going to take the selectmen's motion as the main motion. It's found on page 9-2. Move that the town adopt a local option to increase qualifying group gross receipts under, et cetera, in the words of the motion, and it's moved by Ms. Daly and seconded by Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Gordon originally proposed to delete the second paragraph of that motion, and the advisory committee has now gone along with Mr. Gordon's proposal, so Mr. Gordon moves and Mr. Boers seconds a amendment of the selectman's motion which would delete the second paragraph and presumably delete the paragraph number 1 in the first paragraph. Oh, okay. Well, the selectmen are now in agreement with on a motion under this article that only covers the material in paragraph 1. So if you look on page 9-2, it would be voted that the town vote to adopt a local option, etc. Delete paragraph 2, and I call on Ms. Westfall for the advisory committee. Still moved by Ms. Daly and seconded by Mr. Goldstein.
The advisory committee met this evening to discuss the removal of paragraph 2, and we agreed to the removal. Paragraph 2 was going to lower the interest rate. This article deals with...
Ms. Westfall, maybe you ought to explain what this article is all about.
Right, I was just starting that. This article deals with the deferral program for elderly residents who cannot pay their property taxes, and it is in relation to the state law which allows us to defer the property taxes for long-time residents who are elderly and meet residence and income requirements. Originally there were 2 suggestions. One was that we raise the income level from $40,000 a year to $55,000 a year in order to allow more people to qualify for the program. The other was that we lower the interest rate, which presently is at 5%, to 3%. Originally, the advisory committee supported both of those paragraphs. There was some controversy over the interest rate paragraph, and we have decided this evening by a vote of 19-2 and 2 to remove that paragraph, so that all that we would be considering now with the deferral program for elderly residents who cannot meet their property tax obligations, that we raise the income eligibility limit from $40,000 to $55,000 a year. In addition, people have to be living in the state for 10 years and in their home for 5 years in order to be eligible for this program. What it does is it defers their taxes until they sell their home or until they pass away. And basically, it's hoped that it would allow people to stay in place. The reality is, in Brookline, very few people avail themselves of this program. Primarily, we believe, because they don't want to put liens on their property for their heirs. But we're hopeful that by making these changes, more people might opt for the program if they're having trouble paying their property taxes. The City of Newton has a much higher participation rate, and quite frankly, during the advisory committee hearings, we had nobody really understands why people in Brookline don't avail themselves of the program. We're hopeful that by raising the income level, more people will be eligible for the program and might avail themselves of the program. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you. Ms. Mautner?
Good evening. I'm Rebecca Plaut-Mountainer from Precinct 11, and I just want to speak in favor of this. I think we all know we are heading into a period of an override, a very substantial override, and one which, unlike any of our previous overrides, will focus, we believe, exclusively on schools. In this, I know many people might support this warrant article under ordinary times, but I want to especially urge a yes vote, because if our override proposal is not going to have include specific budget items that are important to senior citizens and other interest groups, at least we can offer this to them. And I urge people to consider this vote as actually the first vote in the override process that will be taking us through the next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Daly for the Board of Selectmen. The town has had a program for a number of years to help low-income senior citizens defer their property taxes. It works very similarly to a reverse mortgage. And as Ms. Westfall said, for reasons that aren't particularly clear to us, I know the town finance director has said he's sort of walked some people through the process, like here's what you do and here's how you qualify and so forth and so on, and people have still not been very interested in it. At Newton, which uses a much higher interest rate, has more participation in the program, so it's not clear exactly what the dynamics are. The petitioners of Article 9 seek to increase the amount of income from $40,000 to a circuit breaker amount in Mass General Laws, Chapter 62, Section 6K, and currently, as Ms. Westfall said, that would be about $55,000. And the initial warrant article would lower the interest rate to 3%. We did definitely agree that the eligibility rate amount should go up. We were concerned about the 3%, because while that makes sense now, we are in very historically, unusually low rates. And what happens when we vote to raise the taxes by 2.5% every year, or it might be greater with an override, taxes that don't get paid by one group get shifted to other groups. So what that means is if you have people who are getting subsidized more heavily, you might have others, including other senior citizens, who might be slightly over the amount, the income eligibility amount, who would be picking up the slack there. So we did originally we were playing around with using the prime or something like that. There were problems with that, so we opted to go with Mr. Gordon's suggested amendment and vote for the first paragraph and not the change in the interest rate. So the interest rate would continue to be at 5%, which is what we currently have.
Mr. Gordon, do you wish to be heard? On the motion consisting of just the first paragraph of the vote set forth on page 9-2. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Now it's 10:35, and in accordance with our general policy, we will now take an adjournment vote unless, and if the adjournment vote loses, then we will continue on. Yes, we're going to talk about scheduling.
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Burstein?
Yes, Michael Burstein, Precinct 12. As per your discussion at the beginning, I'd like to make the first motion that we adjourn to tomorrow night and see how that goes.
Okay, I will accept a motion to adjourn to tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Ms. Daly?
Nancy Daly. In addition to being a member of the Board of Selectmen, I am also a member of the Democratic Town Committee. And I was asked by Cindy Rowe to speak against this. While generally I'm a person who favors just ripping the Band-Aid off and getting town meeting over with, so I did not initially support the schedule where we do Tuesday, skip Wednesday, do Thursday. But I will say that having agreed to that and having published that schedule, some people made plans based on that, and the Democratic Town Committee has invited candidates from all over the state for the offices of Treasurer and Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor to come here to Brookline tomorrow. It was a lot of work to get this together, and I know I heard from Ms. Rowe that she expected many of you to be among the audience tomorrow night. And so while I have the deepest respect for your vacation schedule, Mr. Moderator, I would suggest that we do Tuesday, Thursday this week and Monday, Tuesday next week.
Mr. Ditkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
This has, of course, whether we have the fourth night tomorrow or next Tuesday or Wednesday has very little to do with my vacation schedule. Mr. Ditkoff?
Joseph Ditkoff, Precinct 11, Town Meeting Member. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I want to say we all support your vacation plans. But I do oppose going to tomorrow, and not that I have any... I seem to be getting some feedback here. Oh, okay, well, if there's going to be a flood, I really ought to make this quick. I just want to say that, you know, one of the reasons we went to Tuesday, Thursday was because people with young children, like me, it's very hard to line up babysitting day after day after day, and it's impossible to line up babysitting on no warning whatsoever. So I think you'll lose a lot of people with kids if you go. If we'd been able to do this 2 weeks ago, even a week ago, it could have been possible. At this point, I just don't see how it works. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. I'm one of those people that have made other plans tomorrow, assuming that we would not be meeting. And I would arrange to disappoint others in order to be here tomorrow night if I had to, but I am one of those people that made other plans. I would also point out that Tuesday night is beginning of the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, and as unpleasant as it may be to have to wait until the moderator returns from his vacation, it may be the least worst alternative.
Well, Mr. Bassett, let's hear from you.
John Bassett, Precinct 6. I'd like to do tomorrow night. If we needed a fourth night, and it has to go until June 17th, we'll have 3 more weeks of emails about Article 26. Let's do tomorrow night, please.
Okay, I'll take the motion for the question. Is there a second? Okay, this is a motion to terminate debate on a motion to adjourn. And those in favor, requires a 2/3 vote. Those in favor of terminating this debate, please raise your hands. Those opposed, the motion carries by a 2/3 vote. On the motion to adjourn to tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, requiring a majority vote, those in favor, please raise your hands.
I have a clarification. If we vote to adjourn to tomorrow night, I guess I understand. David Lowe.
And who are you?
David Lowe, Precinct 11.
Still Mr. Lowe.
Still.
Let's go ahead.
And tomorrow night, I'll still be David Lowe, Precinct 11. If we vote to adjourn till tomorrow, I get it, we come back tomorrow, and we leave now. But if we turn this down, what's the next alternative?
The next alternative is to vote to adjourn to Thursday night.
Oh, okay.
And we will then, on Thursday night, in all likelihood, vote to adjourn to Monday night. And on Monday night, if we need a fourth session, we will determine at that time whether it's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, the 17th, or the 30th. So, on the motion to adjourn town meeting to tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Motion fails. On the...
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to move to adjourn to Thursday night, please.
Oh, you certainly may, Mr. Burstein.
Thank you.
Is there a second to Mr. Burstein's? All those in favor of adjourning to Thursday night, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Town meeting is adjourned to 7 o'clock on Thursday night.
Could you explain, for the benefit of newcomers, what your policy is at 10:30 and 11 and 12?
No, I won't explain that now, Mr. Farlow. We've adjourned town meeting.